OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
All right, you're very welcome along to OTB AM. It's Sheahan Eoin with you this Tuesday morning, all the way through until 10 a.m. If you want to get in touch with us, we'd love to hear from you. 087 9 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. Or, of course, you can leave a comment on the YouTube stream if you're watching us there. Best place to watch us these days, of course, is on the OTB SPORTS app. You can also get us on Twitter, @OffTheBall or @OffTheBallAM. Eoin, it was staring down the barrel of a very long afternoon for you on Sunday when you were hosting, and looks like the game is, well, certainly the kickoff is being postponed. You're like, how are we going to fill? And then all of a sudden there was not that much need to fill because events were unfolding quite quickly.
Yeah, it was pretty sensational what was happening at Manchester. I was looking forward to settling in, watching Leinster smash La Rochelle, and then settling in to watch Manchester United 0, Liverpool 0 after that. Maybe rereading some of the great interviews that were carried out in the Sunday Independent throughout the course of the afternoon. Who knows how the Sunday would have unfolded. None of those things ended up happening because of the Manchester United fans. With what was like an extraordinary protest. Like we all know that the context around it is historic, and the last couple of weeks have been incredible. But the actual things that we saw in the protest, no matter what era we're living in, no matter what the context is, in and of itself is absolutely crazy. The guy on top of the goalpost kicking the fella, filming himself while doing a bicycle kick into the Old Trafford goals, the corner flag being held aloft, the Lowry Hotel, and trying to pin the team into the team bus and into the hotel behind the team bus. It was just an incredible day's events.
Bringing a football to a protest was one of the underrated moments of the whole thing. Where are you going? We're going to protest. What are you bringing the football for? Oh, we might get on the pitch for a kickabout.
Yeah, and of course, going in full Kerry kit. Sorry, not full Kerry kit. Kerry jersey was the way to go. Like I think I was told yesterday that I've actually gone to a Kerry match dressed the exact same way as the guy who was at Old Trafford in the Kerry jersey. The terrible shorts and runners combo is how I tend to show up at big July game in Killarney, but this guy was in Manchester.
Who knew that Kerry, the Kerry colours were so aligned with the Glazers out movement?
We're all socialists at heart in
absolutely
Kerry.
Perfect. At 7:32 this morning, that is the main story of the day that we're covering. We'll obviously preview the game a little bit later on. That's happening tonight, but I'm delighted to say Andy Mitten is with us this morning. Andy, good morning to you. How are you?
Good morning. Fine, thank you.
So
nice
listen, I've got to say, I was very sceptical about there being any significant change coming out of the end of the Super League, because it feels like we've seen this in politics, we've seen this in world history, where something happens, there's an outcry, a committee gets put in place by the politicians, and it takes a long time, and everybody's emotion slowly dies, and all of a sudden we're back to the status quo. But there felt like something a little bit different happened at the weekend. I felt that all of a sudden maybe the beginnings of something where the grassroots are going to organise and speak to each other. Perhaps it has the chance for affecting some meaningful change. What's your take on this now, 24 hours on?
Perhaps it does have. And I remember your comments a couple of weeks ago when you couldn't really understand why the protest had come about, and it was more about the terrible timing of it. And I think you absolutely had a point there, but sometimes things just happen. And what happened at Old Trafford on Sunday, yes, the protest was organised for a time and a place, but everything else just happened naturally. Nobody planned to get inside the stadium, and it's just this body of people came together, very passionate. You saw the strength of feeling there. They were building on the momentum which had been created in previous weeks since the announcement of the Super League. But nobody had any idea how many people would turn up. Of course, there was talk, I'm going, yeah, he's going. And when they got there, there was a little bit of a social aspect to it because people had not seen each other for well over a year because they've not been able to, because there's been no fans at matches since March 2019. And then the images and films, it went around the world. It was the front page of the New York Times, which was exactly what the people there wanted to happen. They feel like they've not been heard for a long, long time. And people saying that this isn't the right way to protest. I totally get that a policeman being injured is not the right way, but nor is just turning up and sitting down there peacefully and being ignored. And they were not ignored. And when people went into the ground and went onto the pitch, yeah, parts of it did go too far. But look at the headlines it's generated. Will the Glazer family look and think, we've had enough because of this now? I don't know. knowing their previous, it's more about how it affects their bottom line. And it's probably more about the European Super League not happening, at least in its current format, at least at the moment, and then thinking we've maximised this investment. Or maybe which would spook them more would be government intervention. So we saw Boris Johnson, of all people, talking 2 weeks ago about emergency legislation, if you like. Action will speak louder than those words. The Conservative government doesn't have the faith of too many football fans for their actions. But in 2005, when the original takeover went through, I went down to Whitehall and met some senior members of the government with other Manchester United fans. And they ushered us in and have a cup of tea and biscuits, and we're awfully sympathetic, and we're going to write a strongly worded letter. There's nothing they could do. There's absolutely nothing they could do. It was a waste of time going to London and taking a day off. So now, if there is legislation to protect things like the Super League happening, to involve fans with more of a voice in football, then that could be a good thing.
And to be honest,
don't know where it goes from there.
That's it. All of a sudden, it's up for grabs, right? If the protest had been fairly bland and fans outside and hadn't made front page news, then there would be no more interest from the politicians. But what has to happen now is that, well, nothing has to happen. They could do the same thing again. There could be more tea and biscuits, or the whatever today's equivalent of it is. But if the pressure is kept up, and if other fans from other clubs join in, there comes a tipping point where the politicians and the Premier League act in concert, and that rebuffs to some degree the Super League. And that might have, as you say, because one of the papers today says that the Glazers are unmoved by this, and their ambition is still to turn Manchester United from a 4 billion valuation to a 10 billion valuation. Much harder to do if you're not in a ring-fenced European Super League.
It is, and that this is what we're absolutely committed to do. We heard similar sounds from the Super League teams just before they pulled out. Today's equivalent of tea and biscuits will probably be tea and biscuits for £7.8 million to honour a Conservative Party's senior members' friends, which have been outsourced, but without getting too political about it. That would really help if there is a change in legislation. The Glazers can talk about seeing this out all they like. What they cannot do is act against any changes in legislation. That makes their asset less valuable than it previously was. And it was weak legislation which allowed them to make that highly leveraged buyout of Manchester United in the first place. It was controversial because it should never have been allowed to happen. They loaded debt up against the asset, and Manchester United have been paying interest against those debts for 16 years since. £1.5 billion in interest payments alone. That doesn't include the dividends which are paid to the family. So when Joe Glazer talked about rebuilding trust, there was no trust to rebuild. He's not even communicated for 16 years. So when fans got that letter, that apology, they just didn't accept it. And you can understand why. And these people aren't fundamentalists. These are reasonable people. These are passionate people who love the football club and have done for a long time, but they've also got long memories. And they remember the damage done in 2005. And the Glazers did nothing illegal taking over. They just took advantage of lax laws to do what they did. And in many ways, they've been very clever. And yes, they have increased commercial revenues, and they've benefited from increased broadcast revenues as well. And revenues are up across Manchester United. But have they plateaued? Is it looking less attractive if there's no European Super League? Or is this just another little storm that they're going to see out?
What happened with the protests in 2010, and how was that dealt with from the perspective of the club, and how did that end up concluding?
Faded away. It faded away. Manchester United were in the middle of a run of reaching 3 European Cup finals in 4 years. So it wasn't about the team. People often mistake this and say, it's because you're not the best team anymore. It's not really. It's not about that. Actually, the team's doing really well. The manager's doing a good job. If you'd said to any Manchester United fan at the start of this season, you'll be second, well clear of Liverpool by May, and you'll have the prospect of a European final. Okay, it's not the Champions League. I think people would have accepted that. And that's where we are with the team. But it faded away. So you have all these really strong images of David Beckham wearing a green and gold scarf. And it became something where the grafters and the swag workers of Manchester ended up selling green and gold scarves to tourists who then went into the ground having bought a ticket, went into the megastore to buy merchandise. There were ironies all over the place. But of course, they had the support of Sir Alex Ferguson at the time, David Gill, the predecessor for Ed Woodward. He was firm in his position. There's been changes this time. Ed Woodward has resigned. The Glazers have apologised. Whether they just think that they can move on from here is up to them. I don't know what their line of thinking is, but the fans, as you saw on Sunday, feel very strongly about this and they want to impact change. Change can be better for everybody. Fans need to be consulted. If fans were consulted, that Super League might have had half a chance rather than just being dropped in the middle of a pandemic where people have been locked up. Some people are almost looking for a reason to protest. So the way that it was dropped in just shows how out of touch the owners are, sat distanced from the reality with no communication into what the actual people on the ground are thinking. And it blew up in their faces, and with good reason.
On that then, is there a way back for the Glazers in the mind of United? Like, as you say, there was never any trust to rebuild, considering it was never there in the first place. Is there any avenue that you would like to see happen here where things can get even a little bit better with them in power?
I'd like to see reform. I'd like to see legislative changes. I think if you just left it to them, nothing would change it. And some of the core issues have been improved. Ticket prices rose significantly in the first 5 years under the Glazers, and they've not gone up in the last 10 years. I think you've got to welcome stuff like that. And people at the club had worked really hard to communicate with fans. You've got the area in the Stretford end, which is full of atmosphere now. That's a definite improvement. Looking at bigger projects, the development of Old Trafford, the Glazers basically stalled it since 2006. Maybe they might say because it was complete, but it wasn't. And Old Trafford was looking a bit noughties, a bit 90s in as recently as 2018 because there was paint peeling. Now it has been spruced up during the pandemic. I think £20 million has been spent on Old Trafford. But the fans have got very, very little faith in their Glazers. We're not talking a situation here like at Liverpool where there's regular communication between their owners and their fans and where they can turn around and say, yep, here's one European Cup, here's the league title. They're now just memories for Manchester United. Ferguson is now just a memory for Manchester United fans. There hasn't been a title win since 2013. A lot of money has been spent and wasted and spent pretty badly, but it's hardly the Glazers' money. This is the money of Manchester United fans. They don't need a benefactor. They don't need an oligarch. The club's big enough to stand on its own 2 feet. And if United fans could have more influence, we're able to buy shares. If there was some sort of fan representation on the board, then it can help football. It can stop things happening like teams signing up for a European Super League without consulting anybody.
It's funny that those steps that you're talking about aren't actually that radical and in a way might be a way out for the owners. You know, add fan representation to the board. That fan is then charged with being the point person for the communication with the fans, and they're free to reveal whatever it is that they hear within certain limits. Improve communication, and all of a sudden you can see the relationship beginning at some basis point where it's understood that there won't be a Super League unless the whole European football pyramid votes for it, which is essentially kind of what we have in many respects with the new Champions League. So there's definitely a way out of this, but that's assuming that the protests don't go any further. In your view, and from what you're hearing, and particularly, I know you're heading to Rome for the away game this week, that hardcore of away fans that would have been going with you this week and that you would have met, what is their view on whether or not these protests should continue, and can they continue to make the front pages and to set the news agenda?
Don't think that would be happening in Rome because I think I'm the only person going. After this interview, I'm going to have yet another PCR test to go there and travel there. And there could be a European final in Gdansk. There should be to follow. Look, I don't think the Glazers are ever going to be popular. I just don't. I think if they decided to sell up tomorrow, that would be celebrated by Manchester United fans. There's too much history. there's too much water under the bridge. There's too much division. There was a split in the fan base in 2005. You had your breakaway FC United club formed, and I know people who've not spoken since 2005, people who were previously close friends, and they just fractured that community. And did they care about that? I don't think that they did do. If they didn't have the majority ownership of Manchester United, that would be welcomed. And the easy way of doing that is by saying, okay, sell more than 50% now. Would they be willing to do that? It's doubtful. Fans had placards on Sunday saying 50+1. I'd be surprised if that happened. That's a lot to aim for, but why shouldn't the fans aim high? You can see the strength of feeling. It is making headlines around the world, but something has got to change because the current system is not working with the owners at Manchester United, but also in football. You have fit and proper people who are anything but taking charge of football clubs on the doorstep of Manchester, places like Macclesfield, Blackpool, Bury, at Bolton, at Wigan. I'm talking the majority of the clubs here. And Manchester United fans live in these areas. They support Man United, but they care about the local clubs as well. They go watch them. They don't want to see them going bust. And I think this lack of regulation in football, the lack of an independent regulator, this has allowed takeovers like this to happen. And of course, the laws in the financial market as well. And it's not just about Manchester United. You've seen the protests from Arsenal fans with Stan Kroenke. It's slightly different at Liverpool, definitely different at Manchester City. At Chelsea, they were well up against the Super League, and there's mutiny in the air. There's protests in the air. Does it fade away like previous protests? I just don't know any more than I don't know whether that the Glazers want to sell up. But among those people, among the hardcore, the strength of feeling is very strong. They feel that Sunday was a success. They feel voiceless, exploited. They feel that people actually took notice of them on Sunday, and they want change to come from that.
Well, I hope you're right, and I hope they continue to protest, because at least then this will continue to be a story, and the politicians will have to do something as opposed to saying they'll do something, and there's a significant difference in that. Andy, always great to talk to you. Enjoy the trip to Rome. Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Andy Mitten there from United We Stand joining us this morning to give us his thoughts. We'd love to hear from you as well. You can leave a comment on the YouTube channel, or of course you can WhatsApp us or text us. 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good mornings start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Here's what's coming up on the show between now and 10 o'clock this morning. We've just spoken with Andy Mitten. Obviously, we're going to run you through the sports pages in a couple of minutes' time. Keith Wood's going to join us at around about 8:20 to look back on Leinster being battered really by La Rochelle, physically particularly. And then of course we'll start the Lions chat. We've got Neil bringing you the sports news at 8:40, looking back on the snooker. Manchester City with Sam Lee in their match tonight. Kylian Mbappe was apparently pictured hobbling in Paris. Pep Guardiola's not buying it. But also what the response from the City fans has been to what they saw at Old Trafford on Sunday. And then the Gillette performance rankings. We'd love some of your suggestions between now and 9:10 for who should be where in the performance rankings, who's in red, who's in green and who's in amber. You could win a Gillette starter pack. WhatsApp us on that one, or hit us up on Twitter as well. Right, will we see other clubs protesting? Daniel Harris joined Eoin on Sunday's OTB to talk about why Liverpool could be next.
But John W. Henry bought Liverpool because he wanted to make money out of it.
Sure.
He saw that it was undervalued, and at the very least he'd be able to have it ticking over. But what he could also do was turn it into an asset that'd be worth a lot more than what he paid for it. What Liverpool is worth now relative to what it was worth when John W. Henry bought it is stratospheric difference. So it's not Liverpool are good because of 100-odd years of toil and sweat from working people building the club up. I mean, Liverpool, the modern Liverpool, was built by Bill Shankly, who was very clear that he believed in socialism, where people fighting together for an end, for an important end. And that's what Liverpool represents. And John W. Henry is just passing through. He's not going to be there in 50 years' time, is he? But Liverpool's still going to be there in 50 years' time, and the fans are still going to be there in 50 years' time. And it may be John W. Henry who legally owns the club, but the moral ownership of the club is the supporters. And those are the people that need to be heard, and those are the people that we should be listening to when we decide what the future of these clubs is.
It's Daniel Harris speaking with Eoin on Sunday about this. Interesting talking to Andy Mitten there about what happens next. Like, this could easily peter out, Owen. That we're in that situation now where you could easily imagine that has happened, and everybody goes, well, we did our bit. We've taken this as far as we can go. What happens next? It's whether or not there is proper, lasting desire to make some changes at a government level, but also at a Premier League level. It's interesting, the Premier League are saying that if anybody ever tries to break away again, we're writing into contracts that you'll be punished by us booting you out, or potential relegation, or, you know, points deduction, or no money, which is the type of thing that Premier League club owners, particularly the Super Six, will know and go, oh, don't like that.
And the Premier League are in an interesting position now because they were part of the whole story blowing up around the Super League, part of stoking tensions around the Super League and saying that this thing is not going to happen. This thing is very, very bad for football. Like, obviously, numerous reports about banishing the Big Six from the top tier, points deductions, all this big language used around it, and the Premier League then to come out in the aftermath of the weekend and to condemn Manchester United fans just wouldn't have been possible. So they're now in a tricky position where they back themselves into a position where they have to support scenes like Sunday, which again is probably a good position to take. But wider than Manchester United, it is going to be important to see other football fans get on board with this, because it'll be very quick for this to politically turn into a Manchester United story, for the finger to be pointed at Old Trafford and say that exists in isolation, and all the rest of the Super League scenes don't actually play into this, that they're a level above. So whether or not other clubs are going to come on board and also protest is going to be the very interesting next step.
Yeah, and if they don't, it's gone, and that chance is gone. And like, if you play out the scenario that Andy was talking about there, where you did put a fan on the board of each of these clubs in the Premier League and throughout the football pyramid in England, and communication improved, I don't think it's going to have an impact on the valuation of the clubs, because, you know, it's certainly not going to diminish them. All of a sudden, more fans will feel more invested in the clubs, despite the fact the ownership structure hasn't changed. And at that point, somebody like Florentino Perez's successor can come along and say, well, what about if we had a three-tier European Super League, where every year teams with a certain European coefficient were guaranteed to be in the top, and then, you know, we have a knockout round, and then the Europa League comes out of that as opposed to the automatic league placings. But if you suddenly flame up and win your league, you get automatic, you know, there's loads of different ways where you could actually skin that, and then suddenly the European Super League comes back in a slightly different guise. The fans, as Andy says, are on board with it, and away you go. If you're the Glazers, you're trying to think some way politically through this that will prevent the firestorm, because ultimately they're in, and as everybody in the show keeps pointing out, they're only in it to make money, and that's the way that it was set up. That's the way it was set up when Martin Edwards bought Manchester United, and that's the way it was kind of set up when Newton Heath became Manchester United. And it was bought to impress somebody's daughter, or what was whatever the origin story was. There was an owner of the club all the way back then. And while it has been built by the fans and the passion of the fans, and that's the single most important thing that turns it from just a business into a culturally important artefact, you can't protect that unless you legislate for it. And there's been no indication yet that people are willing to legislate for it. So there's an easy way out for the owners, I think, is to like bring the fans in. And you've seen it with Liverpool. Liverpool have been very good at this before, where there's been outcry about stuff. They've just hired the right people to make them be able to communicate better with the community. Manchester United didn't bother doing that because they felt like they didn't need to. They'll get a little bit. My concern is that they'll get a little bit better at the communication aspect of this, and that we end up with the same scenario where the owners have paid a bit of lip service to the fans feel a little bit placated, they don't bother legislating significantly. The Premier League bans anybody from thinking about a Super League properly in the Florentino Perez mode, but then actually just buys in to whatever it is that is the next better thought out variant of the Super League.
Yeah, like that's probably what happens next with regards to the wider scale of things, because I guess it is in the Premier League's interest to have clubs that are battling on the biggest stage possible, as long as that can coexist with your own Premier League model. And I think politically it is quite interesting as well that, I guess, once the Super League thing came up, it made sense for anybody in power in Britain to say this thing is a terrible idea, because it would diminish the value of your biggest sports league in your country. Now, though, what then happens? You want to maintain the value of the biggest sports league in the country, and it's important, I guess, for the idea about the Glazers actually upholding that value to be deconstructed over the next little while. Because I do think that misconception has been out there that the idea of signing Harry Maguire for tons of millions of pounds, I can't remember how much Harry Maguire was signed for, is in some way connected to the business acumen of Joel Glazer. And I think that idea has been pretty roundly deconstructed over the last little while, but there is still further steps to go to show that the Glazers are not responsible for that. The Glazers are the ones benefiting off it a little bit, maybe press the green light on it a little bit, but it's not their money, essentially, that they're spending on players like that. That the Manchester United scenario is different to Chelsea and to Manchester City, basically, because I think immediately the Super League was, it's 6 versus 14 when it came to the Premier League, but actually all these 6 clubs are constructed in very different ways. They've all got owners with very different interests. While they all wanted the same thing with the Super League at one point or another, the way in which their ownerships are structured is very different, and perhaps the most sinister setup of all of them, well, actually, no, I'm not going to say that, but a sinister setup is certainly Manchester United, and it has been flagrantly so for the longest period of time amongst those top 6 clubs. So it's important to actually push that idea that it's not this blank cheque coming in from Florida. This is somebody who wants to take checks out of Manchester United and enhance their wealth in Florida rather than the other way.
It's actually the opposite of blank cheques. It's blank cheques going the other direction.
Yeah.
It's the complete opposite of having an oligarch in charge.
Yeah.
Reminder, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Interesting, in the midst of all this, one of the other tectonic plates is shifting at Arsenal. Thierry Henry has confirmed that the founder of Spotify, what's his first name? Daniel Ek came to him, and himself and Vieira and Bergkamp heard him out, and that he's now calling on the Kroenkes to listen to Daniel Ek about a potential sale. I don't really get this in a way. Like, I get that you don't want the Kroenkes to be in charge because they haven't been great owners. It's really easy to say they have not been great owners. And what difference would it make having this billionaire be in charge? Why aren't those 3 using their political clout to agitate for a 50+1? Is that not the right thing to do at the moment? Because are you not just replacing one billionaire owner with another? What's the point of that?
Yeah, it is quite a short-term outlook to think that they can just buy out the Kroenkes, and like that is the truthful way of how you are going to get the Kroenkes out in the short term. But there is a bigger picture here, isn't there? There is a talk of proper reform, like on a legislation level, and that may actually filter down to Arsenal, and that would essentially force the Kroenkes out. Maybe they could use their political capital in that way instead, the likes of Henry, Bergkamp and Vieira. But no, they are backing this guy who has pitched himself as an Arsenal fan, as a good guy. You would have to have concerns about that. You like that this is going to actually represent anything other than maybe a happier face or a more amicable face at the top of Arsenal, because that's all that's changing really is just a better PR drive from the club, an easier PR push from the club.
Yeah, so he's saying that he's had a conversation, Thierry Henry has had a conversation with the Arsenal Supporters Trust, and they want to put Arsenal people in there and put Arsenal people on the board, the type of thing that you haven't seen in a long time. See, you go back to the period of time where before Wenger came in, and for the vast majority of the time Wenger was there, the club was run in that way, and then the Kroenkes came in and took over, and things changed. You know, the famous the Arsenal way in the Marble Halls, that all made a lot of sense. It's just that unless Daniel Ek is coming in to facilitate the club becoming owned by the fans in some kind of Barcelona way, it's just going to be the same. It's just the same methodology, and like, you can have a better owner. I think it's fair to say, like, I know Daniel Harris was making the point that John W. Henry was there to make money, but they are at least capable of investing and showing that they're interested in investing, and they have been better owners than the Glazers, it's fair to say. But it's all degrees. They're all kind of similar in one way, and I don't think if you're an Arsenal fan, you probably just want the Kroenkes out, and you think what's going to be next is automatically going to be better. And you look at Hicks and Gillette, and you go, yeah, well, if the difference between Kroenke and Eck is the same as Hicks and Gillette and John W. Henry, then happy days. That's been a massive success. So I don't know. It will be very interesting to see what the Liverpool fans do on the back of what happened at the weekend, because if they were to come out next, and they've got a long tradition of protest, if this spreads, then all of a sudden, I think there could be real structural change in how England legislates for the ownership of its football clubs. And that would be a significant achievement. And I think that would be a really important moment for sport being separated from just pure business, and us recognising that sport has a value intrinsically beyond, say, a shop. Yeah, I remember around about the year 2000, Arnott's was worth more than Manchester United. On the stock market, the market capitalisation of Arnott's was higher than Manchester United. Arnott's a very important department store in Ireland. It has, supported thousands and thousands of families since its inception through jobs and trade and all that kind of stuff. And so it is a culturally important for the city of Dublin. But Manchester United was this global club that had appeal way beyond the city of Manchester. And it was exploited as such by the people who came in from that point forward, going, well, I can sell shirts all over the world and I can sell TV rights all over the world, so let's make money off the back of it. But that's how we used to value these things. There was kind of this is sport, and it's valued at this level because it hadn't yet been used to exploit its customers / fans.
Yeah, there's an exploitation level to it as well, but there is also the globalisation of football post that point of 2000, into the 90s, and I guess it just accelerated into the first decade of this millennium. And I do think that there is a positive nature to that football made an unbelievable machine of itself when it came to its own publicity. The players ended up getting paid more, the sport had better profile than ever, and I think that people like the Glazers have tried to tap into that as some sort of way that they've contributed to football, that they are responsible for the positive elements of globalisation. Yes, there may be negatives, but we have pushed football into the deep reaches of the entire world, which is just not the case. FIFA, Sky, FIFA the video game, are more responsible for those sort of things than anything the Glazers have ever done. That, yes, there is the stock market valuation that has gone through the roof time and time again over the last 20 years, but that comes with the global reach of your club as well, and that is down to the success of the team and to all these different factors. And it is not down to your billionaire owners at the club, but what the billionaire owners have done is utilise that for their own profit. So they've managed to twist this in every sort of way. But even to suggest that would suggest that there was some sort of cunning plan here from the Glazers to try and use this as a great PR win. I'm not sure there was. I think that there was just a sense of luck as well from them. Maybe they didn't think football would actually go to a whole other level post 2005 themselves. I think it was fairly obvious that was the direction it was going, and I think that you could easily see the value of that brand. And the sport needs to come to terms with the fact that it is a very powerful marketing tool and will always generate this amount of money. And how do you live with that amount of money? What is an appropriate way for the football club's fans to accept that there will be global fans who have some importance? The importance of that relationship with the club needs to be recognised, right? So this gets kind of nuanced, and is the best way to have a benevolent owner who can't take the club and turn it into a European Super League? Is the John W. Henry model, without the ability to break away, is that perfect? Is Daniel Eck actually the saviour of modern football, where he'll come in and say, "Oh no, I just want this to go"? It's hard to say. I mean, certainly there was members of the Bayern Munich hierarchy who didn't like the 50+1. Because they wanted the freedom to take the club in whatever direction world football was going. So, look, I don't know, loads of comments as you expect coming in on this, and we'll get to them in just a minute. It's 5 minutes past 8 this morning. A very packed show between now and 10 o'clock still to come. We're going to hear from Sam Lee before 9 o'clock on the Manchester City side of things. Neil Treacy will bring us the latest sports news, including a look back at the World Snooker Championship finals. Up next, we've got rugby with Keith Wood.
OTB AM on OTB Sports Radio, Ireland's first and only sports radio station. Off the ball.
Jamie caught Frank with quite a bad challenge, and the physio's patching him up, and Les Seeley is turned to Frank. He went, Frank, get back on and do him good and proper. He said he took a liberty there. He said, make sure you leave it on him good and proper. And I'm stood there, I'm thinking, oh, hang on. He's talking about him doing what? This ain't right, you know?
Off the ball. Weeknights from 7 and weekends from 1.
This is OTB Sports Radio, live 24/7 on the OTB Sports app.
Sean, what's that thing going round the garden?
That is our new Husqvarna Automower.
Automower?
Yeah, it's a robotic lawnmower from Husqvarna. Cuts the grass automatically, has GPS tracking and an app. Even works in the rain. I just thought, why spend time cutting grass when I could spend it with the family?
Great! You can put the dinner on, so...
No can do, love. Have to paint the man cave.
Husqvarna Automower. Never mow again. Learn more at husqvarna.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
Right, 6 minutes past 8. I'm going to run you through the sports pages here this morning. If you want to have a quick look at them, we'll do that in a little while because we've got Keith Wood with us. We may as well go straight to Keith. Keith, good morning to you. How are you?
Morning, Ger. How are you doing?
Well, it was a chastening weekend for Leinster as once again they reached the semi-finals of the European Cup, and it looks like the build-up has been good. Most of their players are back from injury at just the right time, and they run into a physical buzzsaw again. It's not the same as the Saracens' defeats, but it feels pretty similar.
Yeah, it does. It seems very similar. It was. I was left with a thought at one stage, and I don't want to talk about Munster in terms of this so much, but it often looks like Munster scarred by playing against Leinster, that they often seem to not come up with the right plan. And Leinster seem a little bit scarred by playing against a very big pack of forwards, as if they don't quite have the tools to get out of it. And yet it looked very, very promising in the first 10 or 15 minutes where Leinster took the lead and looked to be in total control, dominance in terms of possession, and then maybe didn't get the scores that they needed to get to try and keep that ticking over to put real pressure on La Rochelle, because what happened in the last 60 minutes of that game was pretty much a display of not the normal way that La Rochelle play actually, but a display of power, skill, patience, accuracy, and a lot of the things that Leinster would be famous for, and they weren't able to deal with it.
The breakdown was a massive issue. The number of turnovers that Leinster conceded, where somebody just got in over the ball and there wasn't a support player quick enough to make sure that the picture given to the referee was sufficient for him to allow play to continue. I don't remember Leinster being killed at the breakdown in such a similar way. Maybe that's the difference from the Saracens game. And I don't understand, is that connected to the physicality, or is it a byproduct of it, or is it actually a separate issue entirely that needs to be addressed differently?
I think there are a few different parts in that. Actually, I thought the referee was very pro-Leinster for the first half an hour. I thought his interpretation at ruck time, he wasn't getting that across to the French team. And I think it took up to half time for them to try and get an understanding about exactly what it is he wanted. And they came out flying with that the second half. I was struck by a couple of different things in the game. One is that in the last number of years, Munster in particular, Ireland most definitely, and now Leinster have, when they're being put under huge pressure at ruck time, when they're being put under huge pressure with the fast defensive line, they revert to either kicking the ball away or they revert to the 10 standing back too far and in a standing place, catch and pass. And that just increases the pressure. So you're not getting over the gain line because there's no real incisiveness then in the back line. So when your forwards are having pressure, you really need your backs to get onto the front foot themselves as much as they can, which is very difficult, but they need to be more incisive at that stage. I felt Ross Byrne went back a bit too much. He was standing and passing, and I thought McGrath kicked far too much of the ball away, and it wasn't being effective at all. And what La Rochelle did was they put a huge number of guys under pressure. Not everything went their way either, and yet they looked incredibly comfortable as the game went on. They looked like they were holding all the cards.
How do you fix that?
It's hard to fix it straight up, because if it was easy, it would have been done before. I do think we need to. I think we need to challenge the defensive line. I think we need to have players running on harder lines off a flatter 10. I think that's something that's essential. I think we have to stop the one-out runners. So I think a mixture between that and pods of 3-1-3 in the back line can change things up a little bit. I just feel that we are getting suckered slightly into the idea that the only way to play rugby is with huge forwards. We're not huge, and it is a way to play, and it is a bloody successful way. But if you don't have them, I think you just need to play a little bit smarter and faster. And that's the difficulty, because if you're not able to win your own ruck ball, it becomes, or you're not able to do it really, really quickly, it's very hard to play very fast after it. But that's the key, is pace. We're not huge. We just need to be faster. We need to play a bit faster. And I remember looking at something years ago. I think I might have been playing myself, or it might have been just after playing, that I became convinced of the idea you should be playing almost 2 7s and 2 9s. Everything you possibly can to get the ball moving quickly is something that turns big people around the field. But I was stunned actually by some of the quality of La Rochelle. Like, Nick Skelton played for the 80 minutes. He was better in the last 10 minutes than he was at the start. That's extraordinary for a guy of his size. But they're big players, and I'm not saying just physical big players, but they're big players, all delivered on the day. I didn't think Leinster's did. I think some of them coming back from injury just looked a little bit shy. For why they'd be shy in confidence, I don't know, but they looked shell-shocked for a lot of the game.
It did seem, Keith, say over the last couple of years, whenever we've analysed Ireland, that we've pointed maybe to deficiencies in Ireland's style and said, why can't Ireland do what Leinster are doing? And from what you're saying there's a lot of this that it's reminiscent sometimes of the national lack of creativity or an inability to create opportunities. Is it simply because Leinster look good in the Pro 14 because they just outpower teams week in, week out? Is it as simple as that?
I think they do outpower teams, definitely. I also think that they have a lot more space. And with space, you can do a lot. This is a recurring theme for things that I would say all the time. If you give people space, they have time on the ball, they can make the right decision, they can enact the right pass or the right feint or whatever. If you look at the manner in which a lot of the teams that are being more successful at the moment, now they may have more money and they may have more resources, but Leinster are a fantastic team. And I felt that with a bit more accuracy in the first half, if they'd got a bigger lead when they had more control of the game, I think it could have been closer. But it almost looked as they tightened up as the game went on, because they weren't getting any respite. I thought La Rochelle played brilliantly well, and this is the first time that they got into a semi-final. I think you have to applaud the manner in which they went about the game. Batia, who got injured in the centre, is one of my favourite players to watch, and we didn't get to see him play at all of any note, and yet he's one of the most exciting guys. And La Rochelle played a cup-style game. They didn't play they kept the ball alive, but they didn't keep it alive for 80 minutes. They kept it alive for little patches of the game. I thought I thought they played with a great control.
I mean, look, Sexton obviously wasn't available and wasn't going to be available, so it wasn't like it was a last-minute thing from Leinster's perspective. Was there a significant difference in not having his experience on the field when maybe some of that kicking in the second half, particularly when Leinster could do nothing to relieve the pressure? It was all essentially kicked by the 9, and there was nobody saying, hang on, maybe we need to try something different here.
Of course that could be the case, and probably was the case. But I think we have to stop those conversations. You have to deal with who you have on the field at the present moment in time. I thought Ross Byrne, in my view, against Exeter, I thought he was getting there. I thought he was taking the ball flatter. He was beginning to probe an awful lot more. And he got smashed a few times for it. And that's what you're going to have to do as a 10. So, but I felt he got deeper again. And I thought the forwards got fairly roundly beaten up at different times. I thought Leinster suffered very heavily when Ruddock went off. I still think he's the most underrated player we have in Ireland. I think he is a guy with bulk, and I think he does. People say he's not as flashy or whatever, but I think he does a huge amount of work, and I thought Leinster suffered when he went off. But it looked as if they almost got deflated by the constant flow of the game. You know, it was constant. I thought the La Rochelle halfbacks just played really, really well, and it was easier for them to play well. They're on front foot ball, and but it is that mixture of playing with big forwards. But big forwards who are trying to release the ball out of their hands means you never get into defensive position, and never a good defensive position. And there's only one guy hitting a ruck instead of two guys getting in there, and it just. The game just drifted away, to be honest. And look, Ahaya West is a fine player, but he rarely kicks as well as he kicked at the weekend, and he was again pretty phenomenal. And when you get a penalty and it keeps ticking over, I mean, again, I still think the breakdown is annoying. There's too many penalties that are being given there, and some of them I couldn't understand on both sides. I really couldn't.
So that's not something that Leinster can just fix, the breakdown thing. That's partly to do with the refereeing of the game, partly to do with just the ebb and flow of a superior team.
It is, but it's also maybe that becomes part of the system that you have to have, that you're almost hunting in twos, and consistently Leinster have been tackling in twos, one high, one low. But that maybe not necessarily what has to happen now. It may be one tackler, one poacher. It's how do you go about that? That if somebody is willing to offload, that you get yourself into a position where you can tidy it up. It's much easier said than done.
Of course.
I mean, I thought it was uncomfortable watching, and yet it was a great game, but with some phenomenal play, and really phenomenal play. But look, four of the best players on the field were in La Rochelle's pack. Bugarit, Vito, Aldrich and Skelton were phenomenal. Phenomenal. And if it wasn't one there, it was the next. And they were either over the ball or carrying a heavy carry or making a big hit. And I just think they did a huge amount of work.
What about the coaching imprint on La Rochelle then? What did you see on Sunday?
Well, I think, all the chat has been about Rog, and it's been totally, this constant element. And of course it is, because he's one of our own. We want to kind of see him do well, and there's always conversations going around on the other side of it. I would say for the most part, he's gone about his coaching career fairly quietly. He does work in the media, and that some people seem to find some level of offence with that, but he's entitled to do all of those things. But I think he's building his resume just step by step by step. And I think he also remembers what it was like as a player, and the pressure that tens can be put under and how you can affect them very, very heavily. He knows what that was like because he wasn't the biggest guy at 10. And I think he's enacting a defensive setup that puts tens under a huge amount of pressure. There also isn't a lot of places to kick. Towards the end of his career, Rog was the best guy for finding a piece of grass to bounce a ball into touch. But at the end of his career, deeper because of it. Now you look at his defensive system, there's a lot of that at play there. Also, John O'Gibbs knows Leinster backwards. He was there for quite a while. He understands the structures, he understands the mentality. I mean, if you're looking for a perfect combination of the two people who could dismantle them, there was their biggest rival in one of their coaches. So, I think they got an awful lot of things right.
One point about the players that you've spoken about there as well, and the quality in particular of the foreign imports that La Rochelle have. in the grand scheme of things, the Irish rugby team at senior international level is the top of the pyramid, the word du jour, and that's always going to remain the case. How important is it that we get teams that can win the European Cup to breed the winning confidence? And as such, do we need to look at some superstar imports to try and get the club teams over the hump that they're at the moment?
Look, there's a couple of things in this. Everything is cyclical, and that's not to diminish what's happening at the moment. I am a huge believer that we need to be concentrating as much of our resources on the youth as we possibly can. I'm a huge believer we should be putting money into the All-Ireland League, because I think it's essential, because some guys mature a little bit later, and that's a great breeding ground for players. It's the second conduit with the schools, and I think there are things that absolutely need to happen. If you look at the players that we talked about in La Rochelle, we're talking about guys who have decided to retire from international rugby, and they get a decent wage packet, but they are dedicated then to that club, and they're not going off to play somewhere else in a World Cup or in an international window. They're not available for selection. They're the guys that are at world-class level, or at international level, really good international level, that fit the bill. But they're also the guys that fit the bill for us in the past. So we looked at Eoin Osewa, who was just essential for Leinster for so long. You look at Brad Thorne, he'd finished, Rocky Elsom, Jim Williams, Christian Cullen, all those players that were able to dedicate a huge amount of time and attention to clubs. It was partly because they weren't playing international rugby. They are the right guys. They are the right level that we want to have. And we do want to have a couple of world-class players. I don't mind having a couple that are presently playing, but you're going to pay them a lot of money. You need them there for the time that are there. So those guys are bringing a level. Like I often talk about John Langford with Munster. John Langford's glue that he brought to the Munster squad in 99, 2001 and 2 was incredible. He was always there. So when the Irish international players went away, you had this guy who had an incredibly, as I described before, the world-class attitude, and he was there all the time. And I think an awful lot of the players learned a huge amount from him. And I think that there's great value in that. So
Leinster should be allowed to invest in some world-class talent if that's what they feel they need to do to get over the line.
Yeah, but in my view, it's world-class talent that will be there. Like, they've been really good at it in the past. What we want are players that, if you are taking one or two players in, that they're going to be there when, like we know, like Leinster are almost suffering from their own huge conveyor belt of talent. So we look at an Irish team, and suddenly 2/3 of the Leinster squad are gone into the Ireland squad. Then you have the next crew that are in there. Now, they're brilliant talent. I mean, it's lovely to watch the players that are coming through Leinster, but you need a couple of senior souls in there to try and help them understand what it's all about. And you learn an awful lot from your peers. It isn't just from your coaches. So, like, I've heard Brian O'Driscoll talk time and time again about the hard edge mentality of Rocky Elsom and Brad Thorne. That there always was an edge there. But that edge was there when the guys were off playing for Ireland. It was still there. So I think they're the type of guys that you're looking for. So we barely talked about him, but Victor Vito has shown a level of explosiveness, capability, capacity, and he is showing that every week of the year for La Rochelle. He's not going off for 12 weeks to go and play and coming back tired and jaded. I mean, I think they get the balance right.
Just one final point on the Champions Cup as a whole then, Keith. Is it you say everything's cyclical, but is it a trend that we're going to see over the next little while, the Toulouse, La Rochelle type final, the French sides dominating this competition?
I don't think so. I actually think it's funny. There's been conversations in a couple of the papers in the UK this morning about American buyers looking to buy Leicester for 60 million. There's different conversations of other people coming in. That's fine, only that there isn't that much money in the game as of this moment in time. And I know that at any period of time, like 4 years ago, they changed the EPCR because it seemed as if the Irish teams were winning everything, So these things they do go and it does change. And I can tell you that the budgets were huge in France when they weren't here in times past. And we're looking at Toulouse. Toulouse are aristocrats in the game, but they haven't won the competition in 11 years. If that doesn't show you a sign of cycles, I don't know what does. So I don't panic yet, but I do think we need to look at how we can maximise what we can do. So that becomes pretty important.
It's Lions Week. Are there any Irish players who will be particularly fretful, or have they all the senior ones done enough to and have enough credit in the bank? We know Warren Gatland likes to stick with his tried and true.
Look, I've looked at it, and I hate picking Lions squads during the year. This is the only time I actually want to make a guess at it, because it all depends to what happens to the last weekend. I don't see as many on as I've flicked over some of the papers over the while. I think Furlong goes. I think Tyke Byrne goes. I think Ryan should go, but he may not. And being out injured, and especially with the concussions, has always puts it out. I think Murray goes. I think Henshaw goes. I think Hugo Keenan might go. I still have been consistently interested in his trajectory. I think he's done really well. I don't know about Johnny Sexton, because I think getting injured again, I think that puts it out. And I'm not quite sure what the story is over the bubble that goes down there, how easy it is to get new players to come out. This is going to be a very unusual tour. I still think there's a risk over the tour. If increasing numbers in South Africa change the fact that the tour may not go ahead. So I don't know. I think there's an awful lot kind of being thrown up in the air, and I know that a couple of people have decided not to. Go on tour. Ben Youngs has decided not. Whether there's any more that will come out of that. I also thought that if it was a normal tour, I thought Kelleher would have got an outside bolter chance. But there are only 2 midweek matches for this. So, yeah, I don't know that you can say that everybody has done perfectly well to get there, because, look, I think it's an abridged version of a Lions tour, and it'll be like no other Lions tour. And the idea of building guys, bringing them into a squad and getting the best out of them over a period of time to perform for a test series at the end is unbelievably difficult in these circumstances. I do think Gatland will go with more tried and trusted people he's worked with before, people who offer something that he thinks might fit in, characters that he think will be very good tourists. And so you may get a couple of players who could be better players but may not be in the position because they may have had injury. I think resilience could be a huge thing, mental and physical. I just think it's what a horrible decision-making process that the Lions coaches have to go through this week.
Is tried and trusted going to be the way he goes captain-wise as well?
I think so. I think it's funny because I looked at Alwyn Jones playing in the autumn, and he looked like an old man. He was hobbling around the field. He didn't look fresh. He looked all of his age and all of his caps, and I thought he was absolutely magnificent in the Six Nations. So he can get up for it and he can get there for it. And he's a guy I think that everybody would want to follow. I mean, I don't know him particularly well. I've met him a couple of times, but he seems to have the credentials. Of course, he's the credentials, but he also has the will, and he seems to have the body to be able to do it. He doesn't seem to be that broken. He looked broken 9 months ago. He looks energised again now, and maybe it's because this could be his swan song.
Keith, there's a question here from Pascal on YouTube. Do you think Sexton should just rule himself out and take the break, maybe extend his career a season?
That's a very interesting question, and I don't know, because I don't know the advice he's getting and the medical advice he's getting with it. They've obviously told him to take a bit of a break. I also don't think that Johnny Sexton owes us anything. I think he has delivered for us for a huge amount of time in any jersey he's worn. So I'd be kind of happy enough that he could stop whenever he wanted to and be incredibly proud. I just don't want him to get any more hurt. So, but that comes down to a medical view, really. This could be his swan song. He may want to go. If he feels up for it and fit for it, I can't see him ever stepping away. And I know some people struggle with the concept of the Lions. I struggled with it this year because of the pandemic, but not for any other reason. It is the absolute highest altitude of performance for a rugby player on these islands, and every player will want to go. And now there may be reasons why you don't want to be in a bubble for that amount of period of time, and that's absolutely fine too. And it comes down to a personal decision. But look, I know we have to start dealing with the fact that he doesn't play forever and won't play forever. And I don't think we've got our head around that properly yet. Yeah,
look, I think that point that you make there about from a player's perspective, if it was the choice between extending your career or playing in the Lions, I'd say most players are going to play in the Lions, right?
I think so, actually. It's funny, my father pulled himself out of the tour in 1955, which was an incredibly unusual thing. He was a young man. He just started a new job, and he decided that he wouldn't go on tour. And he did tour in 59. Which I think is surprising in some respects, because often if you pulled yourself out, you would never get picked again. But in this particular case, you're looking at, like, a World Cup is a 4-year cycle. The Lions is 2 months. That's the truth of it, and like, I can't see Johnny Sexton at the next World Cup. I just can't. But the Lions is only a few weeks away.
And did your dad regret not going in 55?
Do you know what? He never spoke about it. I only found out, his brother told me about 4 years ago. I never knew that story until about 4 years ago.
Wow, I'm sure he's pretty glad he got picked again afterwards. Otherwise,
I'm sure he was.
It might have been what did I do? Yeah. Keith, great stuff. Thanks a million.
Cheers, gents.
Keith Wood giving us some insight there. The Lions, obviously, on Thursday, we'll be going big on that, and we'll be obviously keeping you abreast of the games as well. OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning. Start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. We obviously broadcast Leinster's defeat to La Rochelle live on Sunday's OTB. Bernard Jackman was on COCOM alongside Neil Treacy. Here he is talking about Ronan O'Gara.
Another man who's earning his money at the moment, Ronan O'Gara. He's bringing them into the Heineken Champions Cup final now against Toulouse. Like, his star is just continuing to rise and rise and rise, and I think regardless of what happens in the final, he's walking into the head job now, or I suppose taking over from John O'Gibbs when he moves on. But he's brought them up to a better place even than when he came in.
Oh, absolutely, and they will have massive belief in his ability now as head coach to give them the game plan that can actually get them to the final of the European Cup and the top two in the Pro 14 where they are at the moment. And look, at the journey they're on as a club, and no matter what happens, that journey's still got time to go. And Ronan, being the head coach, being the DOR or having no DOR, will have a role to play in that. So you can see why he signed off for 3 years. He can see these guys day in, day out.
You mentioned the journey La Rochelle have been on. Like, we referenced it in commentary. 2014, they came up from Pro D2 into the top 14, and I don't know the ins and outs. I assume you would certainly know it a lot better than me, but it doesn't seem like they're a club who just threw money at a situation and decided one day 7 or 8 years ago, we're going to be one of the best teams in France. This is a project that's been building piece by piece down the years.
Yeah, they're quite similar to Leinster in that Mick Dawson has been the Leinster CEO since the start of professionalism, and their president has been president for 21 years. He played for the club, and he's got the community behind him. So, he has money, and he absolutely he's not afraid to put his hand in his pocket. But the sponsors, the fans, like, they've sold out every single game for 3 years in the top 14. 16,000, bang. If you don't get a ticket early, you don't get in. That's phenomenal, and they represent the people of that area, and they're absolutely loving it. I think that it's gone way quicker than they thought. I mean, for them to be in a European final, that's not generally how teams grow unless you have a Lorenzetti or a Bugella who's going to just throw the kitchen sink at it. They have grown. They've brought through players from their academy. They recruited really well from other clubs in France. Players like Doulan, Plisson, who weren't getting game time in their own club, and have come into an environment where good coaching, good culture, beautiful place to live, and it's so impressive. A lot of people come to Leinster to learn about their system. I guarantee you now, people will be going to La Rochelle to see what they've done.
Yeah, very, very impressive coaching performance from O'Gara and Gibbs. And some quick comments for you. Were Leinster overconfident going to this game? It seems the team gets scared on the big stage, says Sheahan. I don't think that team gets scared. They have enough credit in the bank. The vast majority of them are European champions who beat Racing in Bilbao not that long ago. So I don't think that at all. I don't think they were overconfident either. Piston Rod says, just wasn't our day. Well done, La Rochelle. South African teams joining the Pro 16 next season will add some physicality to the league and help us prepare for games against La Rochelle and Sarries in the future. Proud to be a Leinster supporter. An under-remarked upon point, but a good one nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. Like, I think that's actually been one of the big reasons, certainly last season and this season, why Leinster have come up short a little bit. That, like, how do you get up for a massive conclusion to the Pro 14 without investing some sort of stock in it, as in thinking that this is actually a really, really good competition? So Leinster have mentally invested themselves in the Pro 14 to win it over the past couple of years, and there just has to be some sort of come down when they come into Europe. Now, of course, there is like the elephant in the room here is that Saracens were an unbelievable team. La Rochelle are an unbelievable team. And maybe the Pro 14 thing doesn't actually matter, and maybe this argument is irrelevant. But I do think there is some stock in it, and I do think next season, when they're coming up against more physical teams, maybe not necessarily teams that are better than Leinster, but teams that are going to be in places more physical than Leinster, that is going to be something that will at least address one of the problems that they found in their last 2 defeats in Europe. But like, they've lost a couple of games in Europe over a couple of seasons. They're champions, in 2018 at this stage, 3 seasons ago. It's not been a desperate run in Europe by any stretch of the imagination. It is a small gap that needs to be bridged, you sense, from Leinster's point of view to actually win the European Cup. I do think the questions at large about Irish rugby and other provinces' ability to maybe win this competition, they're valid questions, because it does seem the other provinces maybe wouldn't get near it. But Leinster, it seems that there's a small bridge to be crossed over the course of the next couple of seasons.
It's just that it's been the same bridge for the last 3 years. Who is that trip-tropping across our bridge? 8:38 this morning here on OTB AM. Reminder, of course, OTB AM live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. Neil Treacy is with us to talk to us about what's going on in the world of sport this morning. Neil, good morning to you. How are you?
I'm good, guys. How are you doing?
Yeah, good. Obviously you were doing commentary for the game. What's your assessment of how far Leinster are away from winning this tournament? Is it the simple thing, and Jerry Thorney makes the point today in the paper, is the home draw in the semi-final very, 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 very important in this competition?
It is. It's massively important, and I think it was probably overlooked as well. Like the fact this was Leinster's 5th time away in France for a Heineken Champions Cup semi-final. They've only won one of them. Like, it is a notoriously difficult place to go. And just to go back to what you said at the start, how far away are they? And to kind of echo on, I kind of caught the end of what Eoin was saying there, and I pretty much go along with that as well. So far as they aren't necessarily a huge distance away from breaking through and getting back toward the final and being able to win. It's just that one little piece that's left is probably a large enough piece, and like physically it is a very large piece, because it's a very, very large human is probably what they're in need of. It was just the size and the physicality of the La Rochelle pack, and particularly in their type 5 as well, which probably just, you could see it was a little bit apparent in the first half, but as the game wore on, it was becoming more and more apparent. Like, there were stages in the first half, even when Leinster were in relative control of the game. Like they were maybe in decent enough positions, 30, 35, 40 metres out from the La Rochelle goal, or La Rochelle try line, but they were kind of just working over and back across the pitch without ever really punching big holes through the La Rochelle defence. You could just see the dominance that La Rochelle had in the tackles and in their own carries as well, where they were just consistently getting over the gain line. And I know a lot's made about the keep ball alive mantra that Ronan O'Gara had mentioned a few weeks ago after their game against Gloucester, but so much of that comes from the platform that an enormous pack and a really, really dominant tight five can do for you, because they're the guys that are getting you consistently over the gain line. And once you're doing that, you're in a position where you're able to throw those offloads and you're able to take those risks a little bit more, because you're not able to do any of that if you're going backwards in the tackle.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if Alaalatoa is first choice or how much he plays next year. But certainly that beefing up of the front five is something that Leinster have tried to address in terms of personnel for next season. And sure, look, maybe injuries will be a little bit kinder to them when it reaches this stage of the tournament. But probably not, in fairness. You're going to have some key players injured at this stage of the year. So let's move on, because there was a World Snooker final last night that a lot of people will have been watching. Some people won't. What happened in the end? How exciting did this get?
It got relatively exciting. It was far from a classic World Snooker final. It wasn't too late to finish sometime in the region of about 10 or half 10. I can't remember exactly. But it looked for a little while like Sean Murphy might be rallying to give us a grandstand finish, but he kind of ran aground eventually as he was trying to pull it back within one frame. And Mark Selby in the end cleaned up and polished off with a match-winning break to finish it with the black ball as well that he had to sing to win it. So he won 18-15, but he says winning the world title in front of a packed crowd specifically will be a dividing memory of this year's championship. Just to recap, he won his fourth title in just 8 years as well. He beat Sean Murphy 18-15 at the Crucible. And obviously, as we've mentioned, these were watched by a full Crucible theatre at the final and semi-final, which is the first sporting event in the UK to be played out in front of a capacity crowd since the start of the pandemic. Bear in mind now as well, it was just under 1,000, but importantly, a capacity crowd. And Selby says that was a special feeling to be part of.
Obviously, just coming back with what we've experienced over the last 12 to 15 months, it's been tough for everyone just around the world, not only for us playing snooker, but to just play in front of nobody, it's been quite tough. So to actually come back here and be the first world champion back when they've used it as a pilot event for crowds would probably stick with me in years to come. And with what we've gone through over the last 12 to 15 months, hopefully we don't experience that again in our lifetime. So, yeah, it's something that'll live with me forever.
Selby, so I'm just looking here. Stephen Hendry won 7, Steve Davis won 6, Ronnie O'Sullivan 6, Ray Reardon 6. And then after that, he's now level with John Higgins on his own as the 5th best snooker player of all time. It's not meteoric, but that's a level of dominance now that you're starting to think, oh, this guy is going to be an all-time great or has to be considered up there.
Yeah, and I tweeted it last night. I don't think he gets the credit he deserves. When you look at it as well, he's won 4 world titles in the last 8 years. He's been the dominant player of the last decade. And when you look at the talent that's around there, for some reason, I think there's this perception that snooker isn't in a great place. But I think you could reasonably say there are more excellent players out there over the course of the last 10 years than there had been in previous decades. When you look at the sheer scoring that's involved in the bigger championships these days, like that, I think it was 107 or 108 centuries at this year's World Championship, which is a new record as well. And it seems like almost every season they're setting record upon record for the number of centuries that are being made at the championship. So the standard is consistently improving. And when you look at Mark Selby's record, it stacks up with a lot of the greats of the game. 4 world titles. He's been in 5 finals. Lost his first one against John Higgins in 2007, but he's beaten John Higgins in a final. He's beaten Ronnie O'Sullivan in a final. He's the only person who's ever beaten Ronnie O'Sullivan in a final, which I think that has to be that has to be written in block capitals beside his, because Ronnie O'Sullivan is, for most people's metric, I know he hasn't won as many as Stephen Hendry, but the most talented player to ever pick up a cue. And if you're the only person who's ever beaten him in a World Championship final, I think that has to put you up there with the greats as well. It
kind of counts double. It doesn't count double, but it's like 1.5.
Yeah, it's 1.5.
Yeah, definitely. When they're on the roll of honour, there's a big asterisk beside it going, beat Ronnie. What else is going on?
Well, West Ham manager David Moyes says they're continuing their push for the top four until the very end. They moved back within 3 points of fourth place Chelsea last night, coming from behind to beat Burnley 2-1 at Turf Moor. At the end of the table, West Brom are a step close to relegation. They came from behind to draw 1-1 with Wolves last night, but it leaves them 10 points from safety with just 4 games left to play. Man City could reach their first ever Champions League final tonight. They take on last season's beaten finalist PSG in their semi-final second leg this evening. City lead 2-1 after last week's first leg in Paris. PSG will also be sweating on the fitness of Kylian Mbappe. He missed their weekend win against Lens due to a calf injury. Here at home, Shamrock Rovers have set a new record of 31 games unbeaten. They remain top of the Premier Division table after beating Waterford 3-0 yesterday. Rory Gaffney, Gary O'Neill and Danny Mandrew all on target for Stephen Bradley's side, while second place St. Pat dropped points yesterday. They played out a 1-1 draw with Sligo Rovers at the showgrounds. And finally, there's a 7-race card at Goran Park this afternoon from 25 to 2. And there's also 8 races at Ballinrobe. The first there goes off at 4:30.
All right, Neil, good stuff. Thanks very much for that. It's Neil Treacy there giving us some thoughts on the weekend's rugby. We'll have more from Neil, of course, across the course of the week, obviously. At 8:46 this morning, I just want to get into some of the comments that are coming through about the situation at Manchester United from a little bit later on. Wayne says, I'm a United fan, and the fans that ended up in the stadium were doses. Okay, that's certainly a viewpoint that has been expressed out there by some Manchester United fans. Who's the Irish guy with the cap that has a YouTube channel? He was certainly anti the other Manchester United fans getting into the stadium. Fight and get your club back, Manchester United fans, says Stuart. The world is watching you with fingers crossed. Lots of love from Oxford United. Paul says, last day of the Premier League, it's nearly certain the fans will unite that day and the protest should make for great TV on the last day. I wonder what would happen. They couldn't force the postponement of the final day of the season, could they? Would that be the type of thing that would get the world's attention?
Yeah, but they would get the fixture planners' attention, that's for sure. I think the point is, like Andy Mitten said earlier on, this protest was on the front page of the New York Times this week. There may have been a sense that in 2010 the protest didn't translate to the American media, for example, and that is important. This, though, is certainly translating. The Super League has just become a global story.
It has. All the American football hacks are all talking about it. Even if it's just a joke at the start of their podcasts or like a small bit in their columns or tweeting. There's another guy called Jay Glazer who covers the NFL who keeps going, listen lads, it's not me. I mean, if your protest isn't working that well, you can't just differentiate me from the actual Glazers in Florida. But again, does that matter? If you're a corporation, which is essentially what the Glazers are, do you care? You care a little bit about what your corporate reputation is, and you hire somebody on a $1 million a year PR contract to make sure that that's handled for you, and then you go back about your life because it has no material impact.
Well, that's how it has been in the past, but this is starting to have a material impact. This is starting to have an impact to the level you'd expect, where a real meaningful boycott when fans come back may actually impact the pockets of Glazers. This is way beyond the point of them being able to ride this out, you'd have thought. That this idea that if there is a fan boycott organised, for example, which is how a lot of owners how a lot of supporters try and hit owners, that it would actually be successful this time with Manchester United fans, that there is a groundswell of opinion here that you would actually feel like you'd feel a little bit guilty for actually showing up if there was a boycott organised, if there was a full stadium this weekend, for example. One of the other elements to all of this over the course of the weekend was the way it was covered on social media, even with the social media blackout of most football journalists in the UK. They'd all gone dark. Sunday was a massive day for the live blog. The live blog was back. It felt like 2010 again. It's how we were getting all our information.
All right. Breaking news this morning. Tanya Watson has qualified for the Olympics. She's the first woman who has ever qualified as a diver for the Olympic Games for Ireland. We'll talk a bit more about that. So she's going to Tokyo as one, hopefully, of a number of divers. Ollie Dingley in contention to qualify as well. Is Ollie today or tomorrow? Certainly, he's over there at the moment trying to qualify. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But to go back to the football, I'm delighted to say Sam Lee of The Athletic is with us. Sam, it's a big day for Manchester City, and we'll talk about the game itself in a moment. But I just wanted your perspective on what happened at Old Trafford and the likelihood of a contagion. Are Man City fans looking at that in any way thinking, actually, you know what, we should be part of this? Or are they thinking, well, I'm really glad that we've got the owners we've got?
Yeah, it's the latter for sure. No, they're definitely not thinking City fans should be part of this. And I don't. Is anyone pretending it's part of any particular movement? It's not so much a Super League thing. It's just the Super League seems to be the straw that broke the camel's back again, or the second camel hump, I guess. Because obviously United fans protested against the Glazers more than 10 years ago, when things were going pretty well for them on the pitch. And I just think, the way the owners treated the club, the way all the owners treated the clubs of the top 6 clubs, has spurred United fans to act again. So no, the City fans, they don't see anything to join in on, and they wouldn't do anyway. Like, had that protest never happened, City were happy to carry on as normal, because their owners, to excuse the pun, I suppose figuratively and literally, have got much more credit in the bank than any of the other owners at the big six clubs. So no, there's no desire like that at City at all.
And so there's no sense amongst the City fans that there needs to be a change in how football is governed. That conversation that's happening in parallel at the moment, where there is some talk of a change in legislation. There is certainly an increased militancy from the other Premier League teams and the Premier League as an organisation itself to try and prevent any clubs from breaking away again. City fans are kind of nonplussed or almost unengaged by that, I suspect.
Well, I mean, there's a minority, and there were banners at Wembley for the League Cup final last week against the board and the owners, but they are in a minority now, I would say. I think once they pulled out of the Super League, a lot of the people who were unhappy in the first place were happy just to forgive and forget and move on. The supporters groups, the main group, 1894, they came out very strongly straight away and said they're not working with the club until they pull out, basically. And since then, they are focusing on the UK government's review into football, and they're trying to push that and make things better for fans. But even the 50+1 model, how would that work at City? Unless it's Sheikh Mansour and the owners carried on providing all the money and running the CFG as they had been before, all the clubs across the world. There's no body of City fans in the world that could put up 51% of that. The focus really is on the UK government review, making football more accessible for fans. And I think ideally as well, they would like somebody in Soriano's place at City. Ferran Soriano is the CEO. I think this group would in particular like somebody to come in and replace him, but and just be more open to fans' concerns, I think. But I think they know that's very unlikely to happen. And speaking more widely for the fan base, there's no real appetite for it now. And if it wasn't for these United protests, we wouldn't even be talking about it as, what's City doing? It's completely swept under the rug now.
It's true. I guess that in one way, what City have done over the last, ever since the takeover, has been at odds with what Manchester United have done since their takeover in 2005, that they almost look across at Manchester and look at the stadium, the investment in the local community, the academy, and it almost paints a picture of how bad a PR move this all was from the Glazers to not invest a little bit more in the stadium, to not just pay a little bit, to, I guess, quench a little bit of this feeling of distaste around the club.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what United fans would say about that is it just goes to show that they're not bothered, because, like you say, a little, and look, it might be more than a little, but in terms of when they've got that many millions of pounds and the millions of pounds they've taken out of the club, if they were to reinvest that in those areas you mentioned, it would be a little, would go a long way. There would be more popular owners, I think. And look, to be honest, they've spent an awful lot on player transfers over the years, but that's money that's generally been wasted by either bringing in the wrong players or getting them to work with the wrong coach, or possibly both. The wages spending has been huge as well. So it's not like there's been no investment. But I think when you see the end of the financial year, when the results come out and the owners have taken out this amount in millions of pounds from the club, and you see City putting money in, and the weird vilification of putting money in via FFP, it's no wonder the United fans think, well, we should still be at the top if we had proper owners. And like you say, if they did do that, it would buy them a bit better PR. But I suppose it goes to show that the only interest really for the owners is taking some money out and keeping United at like a relative level of success, but nothing like what the fans are used to. If they make the top 4, they seem to be happy, and I think that's what fans are most annoyed about.
It's really interesting, Sam, to have watched these two diametrically opposed methods of club ownership evolve across the city over the last decade or so. From your own perspective, and with that kind of unique proximity to these two things, what do you think the future of English football is? Like, my concern is that this is all going to disappear over the summer. Big transfers will arrive because there's an opportunity for the clubs to sign some players that are knocked down rate because of COVID, and the TV deals have been done now for certainly the domestic Premier League deals have been done, which guarantees a fixed amount of income and whatever about their losses over the last while over COVID. The Crucible was full last night. Fans will be back in stadiums next year. The merry-go-round will continue and the game will roll on, and not much will happen in terms of change.
I wouldn't be too surprised, no, if that were the case. Though obviously the talk now is the Premier League will bring in this charter where, you know, club owners or boards have to sign it, and if they break it, there will be strict punishments. But there's a similar thing already. I think the biggest indication that not too much will change, there might be individual change, individual clubs, but we saw with the Super League, like fans, the best thing about it was fans at different clubs just united immediately against their own clubs and were kind of supporting each other's clubs and fans. You know, so when James Milner spoke out against the Super League on that Monday night, you know, City fans were happy with that. And, you know, City fans don't particularly like James Milner after he left City. And everyone was happy to unite against it. But like I say, now the Super League's not happening. It's kind of broken up a bit. And you've obviously got the fans whose owners are less popular protesting the most. So we saw the protests at Arsenal because they want the Cronkies out, and it's easy to understand why if you look at their kind of lack of success on the pitch. United's to another degree at the weekend. City's not, you know, there's no real appetite for that. Chelsea's as well. Chelsea haven't really got any appetite, well, no appetite to get rid of Abramovich, the same at City. So it's all become very fragmented. Spurs, there's been a bit, but no major stuff. So it's all fragmented now. And that kind of groundswell of fans pulling in the same direction just dissipated overnight, really. So you will still have, you know, if United don't finish in the top, I don't know, what would it be now? 2 next season, 3, maybe 4 if they have a bad year. Then they will protest against the Glazers again. Arsenal will probably protest against the Cronkies again if they finish 10th next season, who knows? But it will be more individual. I don't think there's any one movement pushing towards the same thing. I suppose the fan support for the UK government review is probably the one way where that could all be united and things could change. But I mean, I don't think any football fans in the UK have really got much faith in the government to lead any kind of review into anything. So it will be a bit optimistic to expect that to happen. But no, and the crazy thing about this, and sorry for going on, but when the Super League was going on, and even now when we're talking about these charters and stuff, everyone's fighting to protect the model we've got already, which we enjoy, but it's not perfect. And now, like with these reforms, you need to sign this and sign up to that. And the UEFA Champions League reform seems to be going ahead, or there's been a bit of backlash against that, but not enough. It seems like that real energy that we had in the first 48 hours after the Super League was announced, that's gone. The Champions League reforms will probably carry on. The Premier League will carry on as it is, which I don't know. I don't know if people like the Premier League or not in terms of how it's difficult to break into the top few positions. Everyone seems to be fighting for what we've got already when, you know, there's probably reforms that need to be changed that go beyond that, but probably won't be.
Yeah, suddenly the status quo is like, we need to protect this, and actually, do we really? Very good point, Sam. Let's talk about the football tonight, because that's why we all fell in love with football in the first place. The quality of match that we saw in the first leg. There are some doubts about Kylian Mbappe's fitness. Pep Guardiola's not buying it. Do you expect Mbappe to start and to see if he's fit? Because let's face it, if you're Paris Saint-Germain, what have you got to lose?
This is such a weird one, because like when Guardiola says he'll play, he said that about Marquinhos last week, and I would imagine what he was getting at there was, look, he's a top player. Players can play through certain injuries, whether it takes injections or whatever. He's not going to want to miss this, so he'll be there. And I get that, but obviously there was the video of Mbappe limping in, and you think if he does play, having kind of limped off the plane yesterday or whatever it was, like, is that just the most pathetic game of brinksmanship or whatever, just to try and fool City into preparing for something else? Like, it's such a strange thing to do. So I'd like to think that he wouldn't bother doing that, and PSG wouldn't bother doing that. But I mean, who knows? Let's just say he'll probably start. Let's say he'll probably start, and we'll have the game we expected. And, you know, City's task then will to keep Neymar and Mbappe quiet, like they did in the second 45 minutes last week, and it's a huge opportunity for them to get to the final. They've grown so much in the Champions League, and because it's all condensed, it's only been in about the last month that we've learned so much about them in terms of those 2 Dortmund games and the second half of PSG. They've come so far.
Yeah, that does seem to be like the big journey from last year, because I wasn't sure before the first leg about that Pep Guardiola press conference, the 50 minutes, the references to Cruyff and how these moments should be embraced. I wasn't sure if Pep Guardiola had actually tapped into that, but I think the mentality of the players and the way they brought that tie back around within the 90 minutes probably show that actually they are starting to buy into this. Mentally, they're in a much stronger place than they were last season.
Yeah, and that's the really interesting thing about City, and the way that they've kind of stayed solid in these games and they've not panicked too much when they've conceded. Guardiola's been trying to put that in for years. The roots of that incredible Tottenham game, that second leg when they went out with the VAR goal disallowed and the Llorente handball and all that. The seeds of that were in the first leg, because Guardiola had seen they managed to come behind from 2-1 down to beat Schalke late, but they should never have been in that position against Schalke. And Guardiola, he'd seen earlier in the season against Hoffenheim, they'd lost to Lyon and drew with Lyon in the group stages. Liverpool was the season before that. So he wanted to keep things tight in that first game against Spurs. I think last season, because Guardiola's talking now and he's saying, we can't forget who we are, we need to play our way, and he's talking about learning lessons. And I think that's probably him acknowledging that he went too far the other way when they played Lyon last year. Yes, they're right to be worried about their counter-attack, but not to the extent of going 3 at the back, 2 holding midfielders, making the game really tight and stodgy. The other part of that is the way they found of playing this season from December onwards is to stay tight and compact, but keep the ball and still play like a Guardiola team would. And that's been the evolution. So when it comes back to the Dortmund games, and particularly the last game in Paris, they've managed to have this control that Guardiola's been craving for 2 years. And you say you weren't sure about whether he actually bought into, enjoying this stage. I think it's obvious with Guardiola if he's not enjoying something. If he's nervous, if he's worried about the game, if he's worried about whatever, it's written all over his face. So last week when he was actually relaxed, I thought, when he was saying how relaxed he is and how you've got to enjoy it, I completely bought it, because there's so many times when you just see him and you think, oh God, what's going on behind the scenes here? Because he's not happy. He doesn't cover it up very well. So, yeah, he does seem to be embracing it. And the message yesterday in the latest press conference was to tell the players, go out and do what you can do. PSG are a good team. He said they've not even focused too much on PSG. He said it's focused on what they have to do, which is exactly the message. So if we're talking about learning lessons and, not overthinking it and all this old stuff, that is the journey they've been on. And, yeah, they're very close to a Champions League final, but it's going to be a tough game, obviously.
The great teams reach Champions League finals, and in a one-off game, anything can happen. There can be a red card, there can be weird stuff can happen in a final. But for them to frank their greatness, and obviously they're the best team in England this year, and they've been the best team in England over the last 4 or 5 years. Clearly, they kind of need to get to a Champions League final. The whole point of this project is that, and so therefore, I'm just saying that the pressure is at its greatest tonight, where you have that lead and you're defending a lead while at the same time, it's all of those decisions that went into the team selection for Lyon. They're kind of magnified tonight. So it will be very interesting to see if you can stick to that and they try and go and win the game tonight.
No, I think they will do. I think in that sense, I was asked about this on the podcast we do for The Athletic. And he was they're going to have, they've got a lead to hold on to. Are they going to want to defend it? They're going to try and not lose. But it's with this team, genuinely, like one hand washes the other. They'll want to play on the front foot, and because they've not been overly attacking. They've not tried to blitz teams. So that second leg against Tottenham with the 1-0 deficit from the first game, they came out and tried to blitz it, which is exactly what Guardiola didn't really want, but that was what the circumstances of the game dictated. Whereas now, City, they can play this compact way. They can stay on the front foot. They can keep the ball and defend that way, and they can keep probing for openings when they come, but they're not going to force it, and they don't have to force it. But the way they do that, it means PSG don't have the ball. It means they stay compact and they can guard against counter-attacks. So even if they're thinking, we've got a lead here, like sitting back and going forward for them is the same thing. There will be that control of the game. Well, they'll set out for it. Maybe they'll lose it somehow. Like you said, anything can happen. But what they'll do, the approach is going to be exactly the same either way. They'll stay on the front foot. They will try and push for more goals, but they will do it in a controlled way. That means that they're not losing that control, and they're not giving PSG too many opportunities to do what they're so good at, as exactly we saw in the second half.
So what has allowed them to do that this year versus other years? Is it a change in personnel? Is it like not playing with an out-and-out striker? Is it what has technically shifted?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is to do with not playing with an out-and-out striker, because it's just more midfielders now. You think of even the left-back, Zinchenko, when he goes into midfield, that's like another midfielder. Kyle Walker, not exactly like another midfielder, but he doesn't get forward too often. He just hovers back. Obviously, the pace is there, but he's in the middle as well. Diaz and Stone's comfortable on the ball. You've got Rodri, Gundogan, Bernardo Silva, incredibly technical anyway. Foden, incredibly technical. De Bruyne. There's so many men in the middle of the pitch. And I think it's partly personnel. So it's partly the fact that without the striker, tactically, they're more stable. They're all kind of pulling in the same direction in terms of, well, we'll just keep the ball. But also, I know it's kind of intangible, but just the belief and the confidence. City's record when going down or losing at half-time has not been great under Guardiola or any other manager. Their record is awful. But in the last 3 weeks, they went a goal down to Dortmund and came back at 1-2-1. That was when they were down at half-time. They went a goal down to Villa in 30 seconds. They were 2-1 up by half-time. And then even with 10 men, they killed the game in the second half. And same against PSG last week. So they've got more belief now. And Guardiola talks about patience. And he said their problems at the start of the season were when they weren't playing well, they tried to rush. They tried to attack too quickly, play too advanced passes or adventurous passes. When they lost the ball, they'd be out of position. There'd be more spaces and the opposition could counter-attack into them. So if you think about how Leicester beat them 5-2, with players like Harvey Barnes and Vardy, and I can't remember if Maddison came on, but he certainly scored. Players who can exploit those spaces. Obviously, it doesn't take a genius to work out that PSG could do that even better. But he said they were rushing their passes. They were leaving themselves too open. Now, they're not doing that. They've got the mentality to keep going. Guardiola mentioned recently about how when they beat Everton in the FA Cup, they scored in the 82nd or 83rd minute. And he said that's fine. Football matches are like that. We don't need to rush. We don't need to really push for a goal. So I think the players now are comfortable doing what they're doing tactically, but they're comfortable in terms of their own confidence with sticking to it. And they're not thinking, oh God, we need to force this issue. We need to force this. They will just play the game at their own pace. So I think those two things ensure that that's how they've managed to get this control. And look, whatever happens against PSG, that's undeniably been the story of this season. They've not had any shootouts with anyone. They've just ground out win after win after win. And they've not scored as many goals as they normally do either. And Guardiola's perfectly happy with that. He's happy with, if the game's 1-0, then the game's 1-0. They know how to see it out.
On Phil Foden, the kind of general mood around him is just constant excitement without appreciating just how amazing he is at this moment. Yeah. The season he's had, obviously his minutes were managed quite well at the start of the season. How much has he improved even just within this season? Yeah, well, I mean, you say the minutes managed quite well. I suppose they were, in the sense, if we're looking at the overall, he's not played too much, he's not going to be burnt out. Because if you look at the players who played the most Premier League minutes before the age of 21, there's only Gareth Barry on there who's had a proper long career. And obviously Gareth Barry's a freak. He's played a ridiculous amount of games and minutes. But the others, Michael Owen, Robbie Fowler, Wayne Rooney, Micah Richards, injury problems throughout their career. So there's a bit of a link there between not playing too much. But the interesting thing about Foden this season is he's doing all the things now that make City so much more fluid, to the extent that you would think that Foden is, well, he's nailed on, isn't he? We all know now that he's going to play on the left. He's won that spot from Sterling. But he makes City so much more fluid. So when we talk about the false nine system, where everyone keeping the ball, he can inject a bit of pace. He can get the ball with his back to goal, open his body up, swing his leg round, and he can run at them, as we've seen. And he plays the passes that give them energy as well. But he was doing that earlier in the season when Guardiola was looking for control in a different way. And if you remember their performances in September, October, and November, they were quite dull to watch. Like, City fans were bored by the performances. And Guardiola was trying to get that control, basically just keeping everyone back, nobody out of their positions. There wasn't too much dynamism ahead of that. And when Foden came in, he was trying to liven things up. But Guardiola was like, no, we don't want that. So Foden missed out games against Liverpool. He missed out games against Man United. And fans wanted him to come on and change the game, and Guardiola didn't bring him on. And there was huge frustration there because City weren't playing well at all. And they were like, he's brightening us up. He was playing Champions League games and he was scoring goals and he was trying things. But once that light bulb switched on and he found out, okay, we can control games and still play well, and still play good football, Foden's been perfect for that. And Guardiola's been more than happy to pick him. So in terms of that transition this season,
I'm trying to work out whose, inverted commas, fault it would be. Was it Foden's fault that he wasn't doing what Guardiola wanted? Was it Guardiola's fault that he was playing too negatively? But whatever happened, it was kind of incompatible earlier in the season. But now, he's absolutely perfect for the system. And I just think it goes to show... People talk about fearlessness in young players, and it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? Because how many young players are scared, really? You see all the best young players, they come through and they're not scared. But Foden's just... It's not phased. When we talk about how he's been used so sparingly, he came into that first team for a Champions League game against Celtic in 2016. He's had 4 years. He would have gone into that dressing room, as a humble lad from Stockport, looking at David Silva, Vincent Kompany, Sergio Aguero, thinking, what the hell is going on? Over those 4 years, he knows he belongs in that company now. He's always had confidence. He's always had supreme technical ability. And over those 4 years, he's been learning with Guardiola. Guardiola, Foden's agents, they've rejected loans elsewhere because they thought, what good is 40 games in a different system when I want to play in this system? I want to learn this. So he's learned all that stuff over the years. His confidence has grown. There's still things need to change in his game, according to Guardiola, which is obvious. He's only 20 years old. And he's got to the stage now where there's no doubt about him playing. Last year before the lockdown, he played in a League Cup final and he played against Manchester United. And everyone was like, okay, this is it. He's going to go now. But even this season, he found it difficult to get into some games, but now he's one of the first names on the team sheet and he's guaranteed to play in both legs of a Champions League semi-final. It just goes to show, again, after a long-winded answer, how far he's come.
Yeah, great answer, Sam. Thanks a million for joining us this morning. Cheers.
Thanks, lads. Always a pleasure.
Sam Lee from The Athletic there giving us some really brilliant insight into the flexibility that Guardiola has shown this year and what we can expect from City tonight. We'll obviously look back on that game on tomorrow's show and preview the Chelsea game for you as well. If you want to get in touch, 0879 180 180 is the WhatsApp number, and of course you can leave a comment on the YouTube channel. Here's what's coming up on OTB Sports Radio across the day. If you get onto the OTB Sports app, you can listen to us as a radio show. You can just tell Alexa to play OTB Sports Radio, or on the app you can just click the radio tab. We broadcast 24 hours a day. Here's what we've got lined up for you this afternoon. It is OTB Gold from 1 o'clock, Nigel Mansell. At 3 o'clock it is Dadcast. There's a career retrospective with Stephen Elliott from 4, and OTB Gold is Jason Sherlock looking back on his career as a footballer. Tonight, obviously, the live show from 7 o'clock with Joe and the lads. You can get that too on the OTB Sports app. Up next this morning, it's the Gillette Performance Rankings.
OTB AM. This is OTB Sports Radio.
OTB.
Long ball forward for Shaqiri to run onto. First time cross to Salah. He controls it and puts it past Fabianski. And that is a superb Liverpool counter-attacking goal.
OTB live commentary. Never miss the action right here on OTB Sports Radio. Keep up to date with the latest scores on the OTB Sports app. The OTB Sports app. Live score updates straight to your phone.
Sean, what's that thing going round the garden?
That is our new Husqvarna Automower.
Automower?
Yeah, it's a robotic lawnmower from Husqvarna. Cuts the grass automatically, has GPS tracking and an app. Even works in the rain. I just thought, why spend time cutting grass when I could spend it with the family?
Great! You can put the dinner on, so...
No can do, love. Have to paint the man cave.
Husqvarna Automower. Never mow again. Learn more at husqvarna.ie.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward with our new and improved razors.
So every week on OTB AM we bring in the Gillette Performance Rankings. We're looking for your suggestions. Who should fit into the green? Who's had a good weekend? Who's been so bad that they need to be in the red? And who had a meh week and therefore they're kind of stuck on amber? Let us know what you think and you could win a Gillette starter pack.
That wasn't an All-Ireland winning performance.
Probably should have won the game based on their second half performance.
Is it a step too far to say it was the performance so far of the World Cup? Maybe not.
OTB AM's Performance Rankings with Gillette.
I'm scratching my head. That performances was just lacked that intensity.
One place to start. If you're new to the performance rankings, by the way, we do the bad, the good, the grand. We're going to start with the bad as ever, into the red. Leinster in red this morning, sure. Was this a similar viewing experience for you as the Saracens games were? Like that moment of hope with the furlong try, was that a step forward into the kind of area of hope?
Yeah, it makes it worse. It makes it worse.
Yeah.
Definitely makes it worse. It's like, but even though it makes no sense, you abandon. There are certain times when you just become a fan and you abandon all critical faculties. You still think, when there's only one score in it, that if they could just somehow arrest the pattern of the last 45 minutes from out of nowhere, if someone could just do something, please. I mean, it will go down as one of those miracle things where, well, I think they held them up at one point. I don't know if everybody remembers, but there's, it's basically Wesley Fofana's, whatever this part of your arm is, that stops the ball from getting down after a brilliant Gordon Darcy tackle in Claremont in the semi-final, and that one win that they've had that Neil Treacy was talking about, 1 win in 5 or 1 win in 6 semi-finals in France. You were thinking maybe somebody could do that, just somebody could be the Gordon Darcy today to save, but no one could do, because it was an irresistible force from La Rochelle at the weekend. They were sensational. La Rochelle were really, really, really good, and that's the worst part about it, is that, like, I don't think there was much Leinster could do, so therefore it's very chastening.
Yeah, and I'm almost kind of wondering if putting Leinster in the red is actually the story here. I know we're going to have La Rochelle and O'Gara in the green, but is that the bigger story here than Leinster coming up short? Because obviously the Leinster angle is what we're going to focus on.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe we do need to start thinking about signing giants. I think Keith Wood made a very good point. We need to stop being suckered into doing what the rest of the world are doing and define our own style based on our own body shapes, and the fact that we aren't going to have players of the size and heft that the Pacific Islanders have or that the South Africans have, and so therefore our game needs to be a bit different. And I don't know what that's going to be, because, you know, when England play with their massive big beasts and when South Africa play with their massive big beasts, what are we going to do?
And we're going to have bigger beasts in the Pro 16 over the course of the next little while. So does that then mean that we've kind of lost the initiative in terms of taking...
Yeah, it does. It does. I mean, absolutely it does. You look at all the big defeats that we've suffered all the way back over the last while, maybe with the exception of Japan, where, you know, they weren't that much bigger than us. They were just faster.
And Argentina.
And which Argentina defeat now?
The 2015.
Well, we had no team out that day. We'd like a 1/3 of our team,
fair,
first choice team out. So, like, I think that was just really unlucky in terms of the injuries. That, like, we had no strength in depth.
Yeah, I just remember the talk around it afterwards was more about offloading and less about power.
Yeah, look, it's true. They passed the ball better than us. So, like, we need to be the best passing team in the world. We need to be the best at the skills, but that's not going to happen because the All Blacks are always going to be ahead of us in that. So, like, what is it that we have? You know, the body shape that we have is like we can have a load of number 7s. If it was just a team of 15 7s playing World Rugby or 6s, we'd be like, yeah, we can do this. We're absolutely amazing at it. But unfortunately, the fatties up front, as Toland refers to them, other countries have bigger lads than we do.
It is not a case that it's a combination of both that has what's brought Ireland to their good moments. Like that win against the All Blacks, the most recent win against the All Blacks, that's down to Devin Toner picking up Brodie Retallick as much as it is down to Jacob Stockdale chipping over the head of a New Zealand winger and touching down. Like, it was a combination of both of those things. You can't really put your finger on what exactly that was, and it was a hybrid game.
Yeah, like, the Stockdale moment is really important in that, though, right? Like, that's an extremely high level execution of a very difficult skill that leads to a match-winning score. I don't know. It's like, rugby is such a weird game where if those two teams played again next week and the referee decided that their scrummaging was illegal and every time there was a scrum, Leinster got a penalty, the game completely changes. And I'm not saying that will happen, you know, not to suggest that La Rochelle weren't the better team and didn't deserve their victory, but, like, so Ireland beat England in the most recent game in the Six Nations, but that's the same Ireland team that got absolutely obliterated by them the last 3 times we played them, including the pre-World Cup game, on the basis of their power. So, like, I don't know. You're obviously in the immediate aftermath of the defeat, particularly because it looks fairly similar to the 2 defeats to Saracens in the last 3 Champions Cups that we've been out now, trying to reach for some overarching, this is the narrative. Certainly the bigger teams against the Irish teams at both national and international level are having a lot of joy against us. So what do we do about that?
Yeah, like, I guess the point here is that how much do make this a big conversation about it. It could just be one really good Irish team being beaten by a better team that happens to be French, and they're away from home, and those things happen in Europe. It's just interesting that over the course of the last little while, the overarching conversation has been either that Ireland need to have silkier players who can offload the ball more, or else it's Ireland need more power. Maybe both of those things can be true.
Well, can we have some offloading from big lads?
Yeah, well,
that would be great.
the happy medium big lads who are absolutely jacked, as they say, is probably the only way that Ireland are going to win a World Cup. Amazing how every rugby conversation comes back to Ireland winning the World Cup.
But do you feel any closer to Ireland winning the World Cup after what you saw at the weekend?
I hadn't thought about it one bit, but you'd have to say, it doesn't make a difference really. Like as Keith Wood says, when it comes to some of these French teams, these are international players who've hung up their boots.
I know, but it does make a difference. It feels like we're, until our club teams can reach a level where they're able to live with this, how can our national team live with it?
Well, they won the ChampionsCup in 2018. Obviously, that was as part of Ireland's greatest ever year in rugby, maybe, and the following year it all fell to pieces. But you would have thought that if the club game was that aligned to it, then there would have been more of a positive hangover from 2018 into 19, because that was all part of it too. I don't know. I'm not. I certainly wasn't thinking Ireland too much at the weekend. I think that we've seen a little bit of a disconnect between Leinster and the rest anyway in Ireland, that they're clearly ahead of the pack.
What was the Munster view on Leinster being beaten?
It's
quietly thrilled.
No,
delighted.
not at all. Actually,
Absolutely.
maybe this is controversial, but I certainly would have found a bit of joy from Leinster being successful. Say, for example, in 2018, I would because of the fact that if you're going to be beaten regularly by somebody in your domestic league,
you want them to be the best.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the way I look at it, is that you want to be beaten by the best if you're going to be beaten at all.
Is that what you've done with Kerry being beaten by Dublin all these years recently? It's been like, sure, look, at least they're the greatest team of all time. That's your defence mechanism.
Different. That's very different. Very, very different. I don't know. And also as well, I mean, there's no scenario where you're shouting for Dublin players unless you're mad about the international rules, which doesn't really happen anymore. But there is a scenario where, as a Munster fan, you're shouting for the Leinster players in Ireland. So don't tell me that doesn't make a difference. Everybody's human, and you can't root for Robbie Henshaw in Ireland and then say, call them all the names under the sun in a Leinster jersey. Well, maybe if you're in Thomond Park and it's full, you can.
I think it has happened. Is that not a rite of passage for fans of certain Irish rugby teams? Well, one last point. One of my Leinster supporting buddies was very exercised by the fact that the Examiner put the three lads from La Rochelle celebrating on their front page. I was like, well, that's exactly what you would do, wouldn't it? I mean, I think a lot of Munster fans were delighted for Ronan O'Gara. And
well, there is that.
I think that, and it's totally fair enough. You've got to stoke that rivalry. That rivalry is important.
I think that the weekend was different to the previous iterations of watching Leinster play. I think every Munster fan wanted to see La Rochelle win because it was Ronan O'Gara. But I don't think, in general, the idea of Leinster winning is a disgusting thought for Munster fans. If Munster are getting beaten by Leinster, get beaten by the best, I'm sure everybody will disagree with that, but that's just what I think. Next up in the red this morning is Camogie in general, the Camogie Association. So over the weekend, we'd seen plans for a national league, then the club, then the championship format rolled out by the Camogie Association. This did not go down well whatsoever because people naturally want a split season. When it comes to the dual players as well, they would have been totally screwed over in this format. 84% of Camogie players polled by the GPA then said they will boycott the National League if the Camogie Association continue with their plan for this particular calendar. Now, the association has, in fairness, decided to use the next 7 days to poll its clubs and members to find out further what the optimum fixtures calendar would look like. I think it's pretty clear at this point the optimum fixtures calendar does not look like the one that they published on Friday, and that's probably why they're in the red. To spectacularly fail to read the room, and it's obviously been an association that's been under criticism quite a bit over the last little while. It's just another bit another strange story that's come out. It just doesn't make any sense that they would want to put the club sandwich in the middle of the National League and the Championship. It's not fair on the club player, it's not fair on the county player, regardless of if you're playing one code or if you're playing both. So the Camogie in the red. The Grand then, orange. Sky Sports is what we put into the orange here. Mixed reaction to their coverage on Sunday. I had one ear on it as the Leinster game was unfolding, and it was interesting to see the sort of pitch versus the in-stadium studio dynamic that was going on. That you had Carragher and Neville very much pro the protest, and you had Souness very much throwing caution to everybody about the protest. He almost got decapitated by a can, was it? Or was it a bottle? I can't
He said a beer can, yeah.
Beer can. And then you had Dave Jones playing devil's advocate quite a bit. And Roy Keane and Micah Richards, everybody's favourite double act, largely ineffective. I get the sense. I didn't see all of the coverage, but that's certainly the sense I got from it. That certainly Souness, Neville and Carragher had more of an impact on the viewer than Keane and Richards. And like, maybe you could say that this is great to have a whole variety of opinions being represented on the broadcast, but at the same time you can see why people are pretty annoyed to see somebody with the experience of Graham Souness and somebody who should be so in touch with supporters questioning immediately, or that his first reflex was to question the behaviour of the protesters.
I think in those unfolding scenarios it's always difficult to make sure you're pitching things in the right way, because you don't know if it's going to go very badly or if it's actually grand. And as the information comes through in piecemeal fashion, you don't want to be out there, like say 5 or 6 police officers had been really seriously injured and had life-changing injuries, then the mood changes pretty quickly. So when that didn't happen, you know, there, but for the grace of the broadcasting gods, go all of us who are ever doing anything live, you're like, this is grand, this is no big deal. And then it's like 15 people have just been, you're like, oh, Jesus, that's a disaster. But actually, there was one point, I was listening to you mostly on Sunday, when I flicked on, and Keane was like, look, we were never under any illusion that this was a business when we were here playing. We were never under any illusion. However, everybody understood that the football was the single most important thing. Everything came secondary to the football. Now, the football is 3rd or 4th after the sponsorship and the partners and everybody else. And I was like, this is a pretty good point. And then Neville picked that up and went, yeah, that is the problem, that they, after David Gill went, they didn't put somebody in charge who would have the football first. They put the guy who brokered the deal with the Glazers and who knew the Glazers, and so therefore had the Glazers as the first thing, and then football 3rd or 4th to try and service the debt and make the Glazers money. And that is the problem with Manchester United, and that's why it's a local issue to Manchester United. I thought that their coverage was decent, but not as good as yours.
Well, thank you very much. Well, we were talking about this actually earlier on, like the idea of how badly the Glazers have screwed this up. Like, I think really that the Super League has made us all very aware of how idiotic some people who run football can be, that they have the capacity to do very stupid things. Like, and the stupid level of inaction from the Glazers here is really shining through, especially when I read David Conn this morning in The Guardian, and like we put that to Sam Lee earlier on, how the disgruntled fans can look across the city and look at what the UAE have done with Manchester City, and the way that they've invested in the academy, they've invested in the community, and they've invested in the happiness of the fans and the satisfaction of the fans. It's almost as if they've looked at what the Glazers have done and said, let's do the opposite of that. Look at Old Trafford falling into a state of disrepair. Look at the way in which they spent money and the way they've completely disregarded fans. Let's do the opposite of that, because it's not going to cost that much money, first of all, to tick all these boxes. And second of all, our power is going to be a hell of a lot stronger, because you won't have scenes like we've seen in Manchester United for the last 10 years.
Yeah, no chance of contagion spreading across Manchester, because Manchester City have bought the loyalty of their fans. And that's what they've done. They've put their money where their mouth is, and they've bought the loyalty of their fans. So in the long run, we'll see. I mean, maybe the Glazers can get away with not doing that, and maybe they'll sell this now and cash in and take a couple of billion off the table, or maybe they wait 40 years and the grandkids sell it and it is worth 10 billion and they take 10 billion off the table. So let's see. Number 2, Irish Athletics.
Yeah, this was
green.
In green, absolutely. Saturday night, an unbelievable performance from the dream team of 400-metre runners. So the team on Saturday night was Phil Healy, Charlene Maudsley, Chris O'Donnell and Tom Barr, who obviously didn't run on Sunday. This is the who's who of 400-metre runners, and they subsequently smashed the Irish national record for mixed relay and also qualified the team for the Tokyo Olympics. They finished 7th then on Sunday, but Tom Barr didn't run on Sunday. Who knows what they would have done with regards to that. No medals in the situation. It wasn't the championships, but at the competition to still have maybe a podium finish would have been remarkable on Sunday on top of that, and their time would have been good enough from the previous day. You also had the 4x200 metre team of Aoife Lynch, Kate Doherty, Sarah Quinn and Sophie Becker. They also ran a new national record to finish just over a second behind Poland and comfortably ahead of Ecuador in third in their run over the course of the weekend. So this is just another remarkable moment for Irish sprinting, which at underage level and at senior level, it seems now, over the past couple of years, is just starting to hit new heights consistently. And it's the volume of runners as well that seem to be able to compete at an international level.
So Shane McCormick has just tweeted.
Yeah, Shane McCormick, obviously Phil Healy's coach. If this weekend taught us anything, it's that we have a huge opportunity going forward to build on a proud history of producing world-class 400-metre runners. Coaches, take note. Take your fast, short sprinters and stretch them out. Take your 800-metre runners and dabble down. Relays are our best bet at getting athletes to major championships en masse, but we need to build on the energy of this weekend. This should be the start of a revolution in Irish sprinting. It doesn't need to be mutually exclusive to other sprint events, he says. It should be complementary. Was a 60-100 runner until we decided to try something different in 2015. She ran 57s in her first 400 metres. He's talking about Phil Healy here. In the last 8 weeks, she's come fourth in Euro indoors and was part of a relay team to qualify for the Olympics. Commit, give it time, work with other coaches, make it happen. And like, it is extraordinary to see not how easily it's happened, but how capable Phil Healy has gone from being the person that we all know as the woman who runs 100 and 200 metres to somebody who is now one of the best around when it comes to at least relay level at 400 metres, coming fourth in the Europeans, as we mentioned there a little while ago. It's well within the reach to actually make that step up. And it's interesting that he's suggesting as well that 800 metres could also take the step down.
Make Ireland fast again. That's what I'm hearing here. Some quick entries for our competition today. Carrie says 16-year-old Wexford youth star Ellen Malloy needs to be there after her wonder goal at the weekend. Rocky Nolan says Katie Taylor. What a weekend from Katie Taylor. Again, you always get value for money with Katie Taylor because she is willing to stand in there and just trade punches. And I mean, it feels like it's dangerous, but then she always emerges on the right side. And those last few rounds were absolutely sensational from her. When she just needed to dig it out, she did. John says Gareth Bale proved he's not finished yet, still deadly in front of goal. This is like very typical Gareth Bale, sucking us all in just when we thought we were out. And Adam says Raj. Our competition winner is Harry Byrne, who is not that Harry Byrne. He's won a Gillette starter pack this Monday morning on OTB AM. Harry went for red, Glazers, Leinster orange, Man United supporters green, Raj and Katie Taylor to make the performance rankings. Well done, Harry, you win. Who is your last one in green?
Well, we got Ronan O'Gara in green, but it could have been a whole host of other people. We just had to stick him in there. I mean, this is going to be a great moment for Munster people to have a Munster man in green and Leinster in red this morning on the performance ranking. So we just had to go ahead and do it. But it could have been a whole range of people. Katie Taylor, that was just unbelievable on Saturday night. She's appointment viewing, no matter who she's fighting at this point. The Natasha Jonas rematch is surely going to be something that happens, which means that Ireland can unite in all of their annoyance at watching a British fighter on Sky Sports taking on an Irish fighter.
OTB AM is live in association with Gillette. Good morning, start with Gillette, giving you the confidence to tackle the day ahead. That is it for this week's performance rankings.
OTB AM's performance rankings with Gillette.
Right, it's bang on 9:32 this morning, and we still have plenty more to come. Tomorrow, we're going to talk with Irish athletic stars Charlene Maudsley and Chris O'Donnell after their sensational performances as part of the 4x400 mixed relay that we've just put in the performance rankings. We'll also be reacting to tonight's Champions League and previewing tomorrow's as well. But here's more reaction to Sunday's protests at Old Trafford. It's Eoin with Miguel. Enjoy.
If you haven't seen the scenes earlier, you've missed fans on the pitch at Old Trafford. Somehow the protest managed to spill inside the stadiums. We saw a fan with the corner flag, we saw a fan on top of the goals, we saw a fan kicking a ball into the net while videoing himself. Flares were lit up, green flares, and then the fans deserted basically. Not too much trouble, you would say, maybe a few bottles and missiles thrown as things developed outside afterwards, but the big confusion is whether or not the supporters entered the dressing rooms, because that of course would lead to a whole pile of COVID complications. And that is very much where we are at the moment, a state of uncertainty about whether or not this game will be played this evening. Delighted to say we are joined by Miguel Delaney to chat about this. How are you, Miguel?
Not too well, thanks. Not in Manchester. I'm in touch with my colleague, Mark Critchley, who has just been basically outside the Lowry Hotel and is waiting to get into the game now. I suppose the nature of these things with COVID these days, I was supposed to be writing on the game from home, but now looks like I'm going to be writing about what is, I suppose you could almost describe it as the second most effective fan protest in the Premier League era, but of course, really, it's just a continuation of the most effective, which was the Super League 2 weeks ago. I mean, it's all the same tapestry, and that may have been the spark for something much bigger in English football, and a classic case of unintended consequences.
From speaking to your colleague, what is the current state of events in Manchester?
It seems now, which is in stark contrast to an hour ago, that there is some very, very mild optimism that the game might go ahead at 6:30. But that's based on the fact that the area around the stadium is secure. But they're still trying to clear people from outside the hotel. Obviously, I mean, they haven't given a specific time yet, but from what we've been told, there is some kind of, they were hoping for around 6:30. I mean, this is obviously quite small in the larger scheme of things, but say if it does go ahead tonight, it would have a knock-on effect in, say, the Spurs game, which because of broadcasting will be pushed back as well. But I mean, that's possibly in 90 minutes time. There's still a lot to be done, but an hour ago it felt like this match just wasn't going to go ahead. Now there is a little bit more talk from here that it's at least more possible. But I mean, it's quite remarkable. I can't remember a situation like this, certainly in the Premier League era. No, absolutely not. Like, the only kind of sense of chaos I can remember is that faux bomb scare a couple of years ago, Miguel. Like, that's the only thing that you kind of remember a match being pushed back like this. But that was completely out of the blue. That was just a kind of a comedy of errors almost, if you want to put it like this. In this scenario, Manchester United knew there was going to be a protest outside the ground today. How on earth did supporters manage to get into the stadium? Well, this is the big question. I mean, even I just listened to Gary Neville on television there talking about how it seemed as if supporters almost just walked in. And I mean, having talked to colleagues there who were meant to be there, for like Mark, who were meant to be there at the game reporting on it, they're at one corner of the stadium, the media entrance, and apparently there was a breach at the other end. But as you say, I mean, there are actually big questions to be asked of Manchester United securing this situation, not least for the fact they had plenty of warning of this. And of course, only, what was it, a week, 10 days ago, there was a breach of their training ground as well, where fans, and it's very much from the same group, ended up speaking to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer about the whole situation. So United security will come under question. Without question. So how did that particular meeting with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer go? Just remind us, for people who haven't been fully on top of the scenario post the Super League explosion or implosion, I should say. Well, I suppose, I mean, it does maybe reflect on the slightly unfair position Solskjaer is in. But again, it illustrates the complication of the situation where the fans are basically questioning him on why he was so against the Glazers pre-2007, given he was one of the few figures to actually have spoken up against it. But now, obviously, he's employed by the club. He wasn't going to go that far. And this is ultimately what it comes down to. United fans questioning their figures about the ownership of the club and just how unhappy they are. And I mean, I think it is one point that's worth stressing on this. There's been a lot of stuff about kind of, unsavoury scenes, and it's even bizarrely been compared to Stop the Steal in US politics. But it's not like that. I mean, what we're seeing here ultimately, it's probably belated fan action in a situation where they had previously felt absolutely powerless, and where, I mean, whatever about the form of protest, people might take issue about, entering private property, all the rest of it. But the motivation for the protest is completely valid. We're talking about a social institution that, as I said, that should be the communities, that was offered no protection when the Glazers tried to buy the club. But we should never lose sight of that. This takeover should never have been allowed to happen. And it's quite, I mean, there is one of those ironies that in trying to push through the inevitable, I mean, it's where they always wanted to take this logic, basically, the Glazers, where they wanted to take this takeover. It was either going to be some form of Super League or something to do with broadcasting rights. And in trying to push through their ownership to extremes, they might have created more problems for themselves than they ever imagined. I mean, yes, we've seen protests before, like the green and gold protests around 2010, 2009, just after they sold Cristiano Ronaldo. They kind of dissipated, and there is this feeling the Glazers are, hardened to this sort of stuff. They'll just persevere. But if there is consistent action like this that sees games get postponed, then we're into kind of a new world of problems. And again, while you might be able to take issue with the nature of the protest, I don't think anyone can take issue with the legitimacy of it.
Absolutely. So, it's worth teasing this out, the potential reaction from the Glazers today. So if we rewind all the way back to the takeover and the countless green and gold scarf protests we've seen since then, have we got any inkling privately of what the Glazers thought about that level of protest? Before we get stuck into what this will do to the Glazers today, what about the more, acceptable, in inverted commas, the more acceptable forms of protest?
Well, I mean, and I have to say, I think it'll be their feeling through this as well. The Glazers, they were prepared to weather it through. I mean, they're very hard-nosed in that regard. In 2010, they just pushed through, let the fans get on and let them have their outlet. And I suppose it's a big question, really, because this is about sustained pressure. Really, I mean, 2010 dissipated without too much effect. And this has to be the difference this time. And that's, I suppose that's why the fans have taken a kind of a nuclear option, where it's not just a visible protest at games like green and gold. It's actually tangibly affecting the running of the club, which is when you get matches postponed or delayed, is exactly that. That's maybe where this moves into a different sphere, and maybe where the Glazers have to take a bit more notice. Now, whether it's going to prompt them to actually sell the club, I think that's fanciful. This is a huge business interest for them. It's going to take a lot more than some minor disruption, which is still what this is, to force them out. I mean, the tragedy of Manchester United in that case is that there's obviously a wider discussion on English football now about introducing new regulations for ownership, about bringing in potential German models, or creating more fan more fan representation. United are probably too far gone to benefit that. In fact, there's another irony to this, I suppose, is the only way it could have probably been tangibly affected is if the Super League had actually managed to go ahead. Then you could because I was talking to politics. I interviewed Keir Starmer, the Labour leader, about this very issue. And I know it was discussed among EFL clubs. If the Super League had gone ahead, and because that would have been seen against the interests of British business, you could have had a forcible purchase of Manchester United. I think that's the only way, really, that the Glazer ownership could have been prized from the club. As it is, it's very difficult to see, unless business was made so difficult for them. United started to tank financially, which still just feels unlikely given the sheer global size of the club, and it would have to take a lot more than match delays or match postponements. But they're probably, I mean, but I also think this is why fans of other clubs shouldn't necessarily sneer at United fans, because this could have a beneficial effect for fans of other clubs in future, in that it creates a threshold and should really, I mean, measures should really be brought in to prevent prevent any other club being put in the same situation as Manchester United.
So that idea that the Glazers won't actually be moved in this situation, people are going to be waking up in the United States this morning hoping to watch Liverpool against Manchester United, and they're going to see a load of people on the pitch. There is, as you say, a proper tangible impact of these protests on the park. Who knows what the legacy fan, that great phrase, who knows what the legacy fan would have actually thought about the 2010 protest or anything of that sort. I think it's kind of hard to make a case against the legacy fan or the global fan not being moved a little bit by what they've seen today.
Yeah, I mean, I know. Again, it's caused change. Will it? The Glazers, they really are about this. This applies to the decisions they take in terms of sacking managers. It applies to personnel. It really is ultimately at the bottom line for them. They will not be moved on anything unless their finances are affected. Now, again, the Super League context might cause some change there, because, I mean, the way it was explained to me is one of the great ambitions of the Glazers, and pretty much all the US owners at Arsenal and Liverpool as well, say, one of their ambitions really with the ownership of these clubs is that they want to increase the value of the clubs at the stroke of a pen. So they've seen the MLS model, and they see that that's a closed shop, and they see MLS clubs are operating at 8 to 10 times their revenue stream. So the value of the club is 8 to 10 times the potential revenue. At the moment, because European football is so open and based on so many unpredictabilities, so you can't guarantee income, the major clubs are operating about 3 to 4 times their revenue streams. Now, basically, the Glazers their long-term ambition has been to greatly increase this, and that was either through two goals, through either the Super League or a change in distribution model where, say, a change in broadcast model where they get to broadcast United's games themselves. Now, probably in the medium to long term, in the short to medium term, both of those options or objectives has been cut off. I mean, the Super League, it's got nowhere to go for the moment. There isn't a market. I think it's going to take a long time for somebody to come back in that regard. So that's one option cut off. But the other key to that is because there's no threat of the Super League at present, because basically, the global football world has told the Super League where to go in that sense. It also removes the threat of it in any negotiations. So the threat of a Super League is something that's influenced every single discussion and negotiation in football for the last 30 years. It's why, say, in terms of broadcasting rights or the revenue from them, the Big Six managed to increase revenue towards league position, because inevitably that means them. Now, so anytime they have these negotiations, which again is relevant to these Glazer long-term goals of eventually, say, selling the right to United games themselves, well, it's just not an option anymore, because they've got no way to the table. They've played their hand, and that so it's possible that might cause a rethink. But right now, there's no word about any sort of willing sale or anything like that. And obviously, previously there's been interest, say, from Saudi Arabia, although being purchased by the Saudi Arabian state or something equivalent to what was in store for Newcastle United would be, I think, a fate worse than the Glazers, given the kind of moral dimensions there. But even throughout that, there was no indication that the Glazers were ever willing to sell. Now, again, maybe the changed landscape through the demise of the Super League causes some, and who knows, maybe these protests alongside the Super League may cause changes. But from everything you hear and everything we expect, the Glazers are going to be as hard-nosed as ever.
Was it a coincidence, Miguel, that the latest news about, or reports about the latest TV deal came right on the tail of the Super League story? Was that just a coincidence of timing? Because it certainly seemed to me that story strengthened the Premier League position, keeping the status quo until whatever it is, 2024, 2025.
Well, from what I was told, that basically one of the reasons, it was actually one of a few reasons why the Super League was pushed in that sense, because the Big Six were irritated at the progress and negotiations about a new broadcast contract last month, which I think was meant to be announced. And again, just like in terms of the lack of progress with the big picture plans, it was one of the things that ultimately moved the Big Six or the Super League 12 to enact their plan.
Yeah, it did seem quite interesting, actually, that was one of the things that came immediately afterwards. And as you say, if they want to enhance their revenue stream, then certainly the Premier League have almost moved to cut off any sort of greater earning in that regard. Not that the earnings that they're making off TV are pittance or anything like that. It's still extraordinary money. Like, what's interesting now, we're watching scenes of rubbish being collected outside Old Trafford. It's how these scenes will go down around the country, Miguel, when it comes to the public. Like, the Super League situation was such a, like, the 99% of people in the UK seem to be behind the protest initially, but behind what Gary Neville said immediately on Sky Sports. Is that going to drop dramatically now when people see the protest today, do you think?
It's an interesting one. I mean, just judging off social media and the like, say it seems it's about 50-50, and there's some people that are talking about, these scenes and all the rest of it. But I mean, I have to say, again, I suppose to return to the point, whatever you think about the nature of the protest, I think it was about time and worthwhile the fans protested. And really, I think this is actually necessary to keep up the momentum behind the Super League protest. Because, I mean, that's always the danger here, that the fans had a genuine moment of power of the Super League. And there's always the threat that when things start to return to normal, which has been the case as games get played and you go through a cycle and the normal football news takes over, that suddenly that gets forgotten about and just the status quo remains. That's basically the recent history of football in that regard. But instead, this keeps the issue shifting along. And I think that's what needs to happen, because I've written this so many times in Independent and elsewhere that, football ownership and the general direction of football around the world, where basically it's embraced hyper-capitalism to a greater degree than any sport, and it's causing all these problems where there's almost this predictability in so many leagues, even in England where there's a Big Six. And it needs a change of direction. It needs something back towards fan representation, towards greater distribution of resources, and ultimately it's events like this that start to spark that, or keep it going at least.
How do you then get to a place where that fan representation model actually becomes a reality? Because it will have to come as a result of voluntarily relinquishing some power from the standpoint of the Glazers. Of course, there is one way to do this. It is this sort of protest, which actually may have some sort of impact. I think you're probably right in how much impact will this actually have privately when the Glazers are having conversations this evening. But how do you actually get to a point from here where there is such a stranglehold over the league from so few really rich people to a point of a 50+1 model, for example?
Well, I mean, there's going to be a fan-led review by the government, and I think there is a wider appetite for fan representation. And so if some sort of legislation can be brought in where at the very least there's more of a say on football boards, that's how you start it. And that is possibly the next tangible step in this.
Yeah, it's going to be a really interesting few weeks. So this evening then, Miguel, it does seem that one of the roadblocks to this game being played is the idea that a fan got into a dressing room. And this, when it comes to the COVID compliance officer who was at the game, that is, I guess, the last remaining obstacle to this game being played, that he or she goes in, sanitises the place, I assume, and away we go, or is there more to be sorted out here?
Well, I suppose I haven't heard any confirmation on that yet. It seems there's a lot of it's one of those situations where there's a little bit of a fog about it all. There are some reports someone's got in. Then I know NBC in America, they reported that the COVID bubble has been breached, but everyone else is saying it hasn't. So I suppose we're still waiting on clarity. And you're right. I think that is one of the last roadblocks, apart from the roadblocks between the hotel and the stadium, which is basically all these fans literally obstructing. I mean, my colleague Mark, he sent me a photo earlier of, he was just underneath the Lowry. He sent a photo of United players looking out, kind of, I think the 4th or 5th tier of the hotel, looking out the window at all these fans. It was almost this absurd scene, but this is where we are now, unprecedented scenes.
It really is. Like, is your gut feeling that this is going to be the start when it comes to other teams? Like, I mean, this is something that seems like the sort of thing that could kickstart something, but at the same time, Manchester United and their fans have almost been mobilised for so long on this front to be anti their owner.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the thing is, it comes down to different situations, different clubs, really, and there aren't too many equivalents of Manchester United in the Premier League, bar Arsenal. Arsenal are probably the closest. So the two clubs who, I mean, this is another indication of the situation, just as kind of United and Liverpool fans came together last week, or United, Liverpool and Chelsea fans, United and Arsenal, who kind of one of the great rivalries of the Premier League era, they really have common cause in terms of these US venture capitalist owners who almost see the clubs as kind of going concerns for themselves, rather than, football clubs whose primary purpose is to play football and try and represent their community. So I think actually Arsenal are the closest in that regard. But really, I mean, my view is that every fan in England, and I mean, it applies in pretty much every other country, including Ireland, that every single supporter should have more investment in representation of their club, and that the idea of football clubs to be football clubs and social institutions who represent their area, and that's where they should start and end, and they shouldn't really be about anything else. And it's that spirit, I think, or a spirit of demanding this, that this whole situation should really prompt.
Absolutely. Listen, Miguel Delaney, it's been great chatting to you. Thanks a million for taking the call.
Cheers, Eoin. Thank you.
Cheers. Miguel Delaney of the London Independent there. You can check him out on Twitter. You can check him out on the Independent's website as well to read all of his work. So the current state of play outside the stadium, still a couple of dozen supporters waiting for the teams to arrive. That is according to Simon Stone of the BBC. Everything is peaceful, he says, and good-natured, but there is no sense that they will be leaving anytime soon. One of the interesting elements to all of this today, it's a very, very small point, but it's just worth mentioning, is that a large swathe of Britain's football journalists are on a social media blackout. So the reporting of this has come from various different sources. We've gone back to the television, we've gone back to our live blogs. Twitter has been largely ineffectual today to actually find out information. There are still some extraordinary scenes coming through from fans on social media about what's actually happened outside Old Trafford. There's also been a good level of debate online about the protest and whether or not people are for or against them. And when Miguel says it's 50-50, he's probably right. There are a lot of people who've got big names coming out. We've got Jermaine Jenas coming out earlier on, questioning the protesters and whether or not this is actually going to be a good look for Manchester United. Whereas on the flip side, you've got Gary Neville and Roy Keane on Sky Sports today saying they're all for the protests and they fully back them. So there are a number of very different plots to this whole thing, and the reporting of them is certainly one of the interesting ones. We can bring you some of the Sky Sports audio then from this afternoon. Gary Neville, as you can imagine, has had plenty to say. Here he is, his first reaction to the protest happening.
This is the consequence of the owners of Manchester United's actions 2 weeks ago. Obviously there's a general distrust and dislike of the owners of this football club, but they weren't protesting 2 or 3 weeks ago before this happened. But generally, the Glazer family, along with a number of other families of football club owners in this country, were conniving and scheming behind the rest of football's back to walk away with the crown jewels. And today we've seen people protest at that. And the reason that this game is delayed is because of that.
Just to bring you some more information from the BBC, Gary Flintoff, who is BBC Radio 5 Live, who works with them and is a reporter, he was at Old Trafford and is now at Old Trafford again. So basically the media were removed from the stadium, it seems. But he said, according to the BBC Live blog, we've been allowed back into the commentary box, so we are sat where we'd usually be at this point with around 5 minutes left at the first half. He does, however, say that they are still awaiting a decision as to whether or not the game actually takes place. But if you're like me and you're reading between the lines there and you're saying that they're allowed back into the commentary box, then there is a chance that this game does take place. But as Miguel was saying earlier on, there is a 7:15 kick-off between Tottenham and Sheffield United. Will there be scheduling issues that put a late kick-off in Manchester United against Liverpool in jeopardy? Maybe, but surely this constitutes extenuating circumstances, especially considering the fixture calendar is just so clogged up at this point. Let's hear more from Gary Neville. Here he is talking, as you can imagine, about the Glazers.
Well, look, I've never thought they were brilliant owners, but I've also seen in football that there are worse owners than the Glazer family. However, I think all football fans should unite today behind what Manchester United fans have done. Because honestly, what they did 2 weeks ago was really dangerous for English football. We must not forget that. They tried to walk away and create a closed-shot league that would have basically created a famine in this country for every other football club. They tried to create a famine 2 weeks ago in English football, in Dutch football, in German football, in French football, all over Europe. Those 15 clubs would have walked away from their leagues with that money and basically destroyed the ethos of the pyramid of relegation and promotion in English football. So that's number one. So it's unforgivable what they did as a family 2 weeks ago. I get Graham's point around them paying themselves a dividend. We could walk into the chippy down the road tomorrow, make a bid, they could sell it and we could own the chippy, and the local public might not be happy with the new chips that they get. I get that principle of a free market. However, the Glazer family 2 weeks ago, they tried to implement something that would have damaged every single community in this country that's got football at the heart of it, and that is why they're dangerous. Perez is dangerous, Laporte, Agnelli, they are dangerous to the concept of equal opportunity and fair play in European football. Let's not forget what we're arguing about here. Today there is anger. I would hope tomorrow it switches towards mobilisation, towards reform and regulation and behind the fan-led review.
OTB AM.
With Gillette, put your best face forward.